Chapter 15. Half a day later, Ning Chen also bid farewell to the shopkeeper. Before leaving, the shopkeeper gave him a small silver ingot as travel expenses. Ning Chen looked at the silver ingot in his hand and was so happy that he couldn't even close his mouth, completely forgetting the sadness of the morning. After thanking the shopkeeper, Ning Chen smiled and left. He didn't say where he was going, because even he didn't know where he could go. In order to avoid being caught by Zhang Sun, leaving the imperial city was the best choice. After weighing the pros and cons, Ning Chen finally made his decision. But before that, he had to go to the Lingyan pavilion to pay off the money for 2 cups of tea. The bustling streets were filled with hawkers. This was the first time Ning Chen was in the mood to walk around. He was curious about this, and that was rare. It seemed that it wasn't a bad idea to cross over. Once he left the city, he could start a small business, marry a gentle girl, and have a few children. As long as he wasn't caught by Zhang Sun, his life would be beautiful. Just as Ning Chen was fantasizing about his beautiful future, at the end of the street, a bell suddenly sounded. Amidst the sound of horse hooves, a group of people dressed in gorgeous but somewhat strange clothes came from not far away. The people in front all moved aside to avoid blocking the road. The envoy of true extreme nation is so ostentatious. The crowd was in a heated discussion. Most of them were indignant. Clearly, they didn't have a good impression of the envoy of true extreme nation. Ning Chen more or less had some understanding of true extreme nation. True extreme nation was located in the northeast of Grand Xia. It didn't have a large territory, but it was full of shit. All day long, they shouted that they were #1 in the world and constantly stirred up trouble. After the founding of Grand Xia, the 3rd generation of the Ming dynasty was fed up with it and directly sent troops to the northeast. However, in these years, Grand Xia had relaxed its policies toward true extreme nation due to its peaceful intentions. This made true extreme nation think that Grand Xia was weak and easy to bully. They provoked them again and again. Marquis, who was in charge of the northeast, had sent troops more than once, but he was forcefully suppressed by the current Xia emperor. Ning Chen stood in the crowd and looked at the envoy on the carriage. He raised his right hand and fiercely gave him the middle finger. He also casually asked about the latter's family. After this short disturbance, Ning Chen collected his emotions and continued to walk toward the Lingyan pavilion. As for the envoy, let Zhang Sun and the others have a headache. In front of the Lingyan pavilion, it was still as deserted as it was yesterday. However, this was also normal. When he arrived, it was already close to noon. At this time, who would still stay in the brothel? Ning Chen walked over and stared at the luxurious hall. He saw a woman in white sitting there quietly, as though she was waiting for him to come. "Sir, you've come." Once Ning Chen walked in, Yuhani stood up and smiled. "I'm here to return the money." Although one would not slap a smiling face, especially when facing a charming girl, the disgust in his heart made Ning Chen unable to smile. He slapped the 1 tael of silver he had exchanged on the table and arrogantly said, "Keep the change." Then he turned around and left. "Young master, please wait." Yuhan Yi reached out to block Ning Chen's path, still smiling. Ning Chen frowned. 2 cups of tea for 1 tael of silver, that's enough. Yuhani faintly smiled and said, "Young master really is forgetful. 2 cups of tea would be enough, but the table, chairs, and tea set that young master broke is far more than that." Ning Chen stared blankly and immediately felt a bit guilty. He really had neglected this matter. Looking at Ning Chen's expression, Yuhan Yi felt very relieved and continued, "Young master may not know, but the tables and chairs in Ling Yan Pavilion are all made from the best sky phoebe wood, and the tea set is also made by a famous master in the imperial city. This little girl has already calculated for young master. Excluding the money you just paid for the tea, young master is still missing 110 taels of silver. But since young master came to return the money so quickly, I'll give young master a round number, 100 taels will be enough." 100, tails. Ning Chen stretched out a finger and stammered. Yuhan nodded and smiled even more charmingly. Who told you to be arrogant? Who told you to be savage? Ning Chen trembled as he took out all of his belongings and stammered, but I only have less than 4 taels of silver left. The shopkeeper had given him a small silver ingot worth 5 taels. He had bought a sesame seed cake and spent 2 copper coins, leaving the rest here. He had thought that he would be able to use it for a long time, but who would have thought that he would have to repay such a huge debt of 100 taels? Young master can go home to get it, this little girl will wait here. Yuhan smiled and, kindly, reminded him. I can't go back. Ning Chen was very depressed. If only he could go home. You really don't have any money? Yuhan Yi's lips curled as she asked. I really don't have any money. Ning Chen nodded and sighed. The smile on Yuhan Yi's face immediately disappeared and she lightly said, then stay here and do odd jobs to repay the debt. Take him to the back hall to wash the girl's clothes. Yes. As soon as she said that, a pretty girl around 12 or 13 years old walked out and pulled Ning Chen, who had not yet recovered from his shock, towards the back hall. With his sleeve pulled by the girl, Ning Chen walked and looked back. He did not want to follow in. What was going on? He was in a hurry to run away. What about me? You owe big sister money, yet you still dare to be so arrogant. Big sister has been waiting for you for a long time. How could allow Ning Chen to struggle? She tugged on the latter's sleeves and dragged him to the rear hall. Aunt Lu, Aunt Zhao, you rest first. Give these clothes to him to wash. As soon as they entered the back hall, they saw 2 women sitting next to a pile of clothes busily. Went forward and said a few words. Then she looked at the dazed Ning Chen and shouted. So much. Seeing the pile of clothes like a small mountain, Ning Chen almost jumped up. He stretched out a trembling finger and said. How long would this take? And there was no washing machine, hurry up, or you won't have dinner tonight. Put her hands on her hips and said fiercely. I'll wash it. Why are you so fierce? Ning Chen muttered and walked slowly to the pile of clothes. At the same time, he comforted himself that a good man would not fight with an evil woman. After sitting down, Ning Chen was about to start working. But looking left and right, he felt that something was missing. Is there no soap? Ning Chen looked for a long time and finally found something missing. He raised his head and asked. Raised her eyebrows and said, soap? What soap? Are you talking about soap? That is used by rich people to wash their hands. Who would be willing to use it to wash clothes? Then how do I wash it? Ning Chen had a headache. He looked at the lass and asked doubtfully. What era is it now? Why hasn't soap appeared yet? So stupid. Muttered. She walked forward and took the stick beside the clothes. She used force to hit the clothes on the wooden board and said, see? Wash it like this. I use brute force to solve everything. Ning Chen felt that he was stunned. If he finished washing the clothes like this, he would basically be crippled. Wash well. I will come and check before dark. Said and immediately left while humming a tune. Ning Chen looked at the pile of clothes and sighed softly, if I knew this would happen, I would have continued to be a eunuch. Out of the wolf's mouth and into the tiger's mouth. It seems that I still have to find a chance to escape. What a headache. As the sun went west, the pile of clothes beside Ning Chen became fewer and fewer. Finally, before the sun set, the last piece of clothing was washed and hung up. When he got up, his whole body was in pain and he was dizzy. He almost fell to the ground. Finished washing? That's pretty fast. Came to check on time. Looking at the clothes fluttering in the wind, she nodded with satisfaction and said, So. Let's go. I will take you to eat, Li said and was about to leave. However, she found that Ning Chen was standing there motionless. She immediately put her hands on her hips and said, "Didn't you hear what I said?" At this time, Ning Chen couldn't care about the little girl's mood. He raised his hand and called out, "Li, come and help me. My legs are numb." "Really?" Li walked over doubtfully and said, "Don't tell me you want to take advantage of me." Ning Chen was almost choked to death by the little girl's words. His eyes subconsciously glanced at the latter's chest. Needless to say, it wasn't very peaceful. "Pervert." Seeing Ning Chen's gaze, Li's face turned red. She lifted her foot and stepped on Ning Chen's leg. Then, she walked away with a red face. Tisk, after being stepped on, Ning Chen gritted his teeth and took a few cold breaths. It wasn't that the little girl stepped on him too hard. The main thing was that being stepped on when his legs were numb really didn't feel good. "Wait for me." Seeing that Li really didn't have any intention to help him, Ning Chen limped and followed her. When he entered the kitchen, there was already no one around. He casually took 2 steamed buns and a plate of vegetables back to the courtyard. He sat by the stone stool and ate silently. Li couldn't bear to see him like this. She walked forward and touched Ning Chen's shoulder. She said kindly, "Hey, you better apologize to Big Sister Yi. Big Sister Yi is very easy to talk to." Ning Chen raised his head and grinned. He spat out 3 words, "Impossible." "You." Li was extremely angry. She pointed at the person in front of her. She had never seen someone who didn't know what was good for him. "Li, where are your parents?" Ning Chen didn't mind the little girl's angry look. Instead, he asked softly. "Parents?" Hearing this, Li was stunned. To them, this was such a distant and unfamiliar term. Looking at Li's gradually darkening face, Ning Chen sighed in his heart. He got up and gently rubbed the little girl's head. In his world, a girl like Li was still a little princess that her parents doted on. But here, she had to be a slave to make a living. She couldn't even decide her own chastity. Thinking of this, Ning Chen hated Yuhani even more. She didn't even let off such a little girl. She was truly cruel and unscrupulous. Her heart was like a snake and scorpion. "Li, do you want to leave this place?" Ning Chen tried asking. He knew that his ability was limited and he couldn't help everyone. But he believed that if he tried his best, there was still hope to save a little girl. Li thought for a moment. After a long time, she lightly shook her head. She said gloomily, "I don't want to." She had grown up in Ling Yan Pavilion since she was young. She had already treated this place as her own home. Even if she could leave this place, how could she live? Moreover, she was a slave. No matter where she went, she couldn't escape this fact. Ning Chen looked at Li's expression. After carefully thinking it over, he understood what had happened. He apologized, "I'm sorry, I was reckless." "Don't worry about it. Hurry up and eat. I'll take you to your residence in a moment." Li slightly adjusted her mood and pretended to be happy. Ning Chen didn't say anything else. He continued to eat the food in his hands. He made up his mind that he must find a good home for this kind-hearted little girl. After eating, Ning Chen followed Li to his room. Fortunately, it wasn't as bad as he had imagined. Besides being a little small, there were no other inconveniences. After Li left, Ning Chen took out the golden paper that he had kept close to his body. He was very curious about this mental cultivation method that was said to be able to strengthen the body. Life Scroll. What a popular name. Looking at the name of the scroll, Ning Chen couldn't figure out what it was. He continued to read. Fortunately, the body he was residing in was literate, saving him a lot of trouble. After 10 breaths, Ning Chen was silent. After 15 minutes, Ning Chen was still silent. After an hour, Ning Chen was still silent. after 2 hours, there was a frantic shout in the room. I don't understand. Chapter 16. Ning Chen had always thought that he was a heaven-sent genius. Although it wasn't a once-in-1,000 years talent, it was still a once-in-100 or 80 years talent. Now, he realized that the mental cultivation method to become a top expert was right in front of him, but he couldn't understand it. How painful was this? Looking at the material of the golden paper, it was neither gold nor wood. It was quite special. Did he have to drip blood on it before he could practice it, just like in the legends? Ning Chen thought about it and decided to forget about it. It was quite painful. It wasn't worth it. He could barely understand the first few lines, so he decided to practice them first. Anyway, it was to strengthen his body. When he met Mu Qingxue in the future, he would ask her to translate it for him. Tranquil Heart, Dan Heart, and Dan Heart, Zhang Xian circulated his cultivation technique. The first time, he didn't feel anything at all. Ning Chen wasn't discouraged and continued. Everything had to have a warm-up process, so he had to persevere. Then, a second time, a third time, a fourth time, then, 93rd time, 94th time, 95th time, 209 times, 210 times, 211 times, 1,130 times, kikik. The rooster crowed and the sky was about to brighten. Ning Chen opened his eyes and almost burst into tears. What happened to strengthening his body? Why didn't he feel anything at all? He still had things to do today, so he didn't have the time to continue studying here. He could only get up and walk outside. Taking advantage of the fact that the sky was still bright and there was still some time before work officially started, Ning Chen sneaked into the kitchen and saw a woman who was busy in front of the stove. He patted his face and revealed what he thought was his brightest smile. Hello, sister. The woman glanced at Ning Chen and said indifferently, Why are you calling me that? This concubine is old enough to be your mother. Heh. Ning Chen smiled awkwardly. Hello, auntie. Speak. What's the matter? The woman's attitude was still neither cold nor warm. She spoke indifferently as she busied herself. Ning Chen rubbed his nose and said embarrassedly, I want to ask for some lard. The woman looked at the young man in front of her and thought for a moment before agreeing. She pointed at a jar beside the stove. It's there. Take it yourself. Don't let anyone see it. Ning Chen's face lit up and he hurriedly thanked her. Thank you, auntie. Ning Chen took a large porcelain bowl from the stove and scooped out half of the lard. He looked around and found a rag to wrap some ash from the stove. Then, he smiled at the woman and left happily. The woman was baffled by this and sighed softly before continuing with her work. Such a delicate and pretty child, it's a pity that his brain isn't good. Ning Chen never thought that he would receive such an impression. He was still happily doing his own thing. The courtyard in the back hall was very big, but the girls in the pavilion rarely came here, so it was very quiet. Ning Chen sat on the stone steps in front of his house, made a simple small fire, and then used a stone to place a bowl of lard on top of it, waiting for the lard to melt. Ning Chen didn't stay idle either. He took out a teapot and poured a handful of plant ashes into it. After adding some water, he stirred the ashes with a small wooden stick. In the past, when he had nothing to do, he had tried this thing himself. Although the ratio was not easy to grasp, it was not impossible. This was the oldest way to make soap. There was no fire alkali here, so they could only use plant ash as a substitute. The conditions were tough, so they could only endure. The smell of the heated lard was terrifying. Ning Chen held back his disgust and poured the filtered water mixed with plant ash into the lard. Then, he pushed it aside and stirred it vigorously with a long wooden stick. I really can't endure it. Ning Chen was dizzy from the smell. He hurriedly ran into the house and covered his nose with a wet towel. Then, he came back and stirred. Hey, what are you doing? It smells so bad. Not long after, Li ran over from not far away while covering her nose. Her eyes were filled with anger. She was very dissatisfied with Ning Chen's terrifying killing machine early in the morning. Li, come, help me stir it for a while. Brother is about to collapse. Ning Chen saw the little girl coming and didn't hold back. He hurriedly called out to her. Not going. Li retreated far away, afraid that she would be used as a laborer. Little girl with small breasts but no brain. When I'm done, you will beg me. Ning Chen was dizzy from the smell, but he still couldn't hide the nature of his poisonous tongue and said. You, rogue. Li looked at her breasts and reprimanded him with a red face. However, she was curious and didn't run away to see what Ning Chen was doing. It's foaming. Ning Chen saw the white foam in the bowl and was shocked. He didn't care about his nose and went forward a few steps. He took the wooden stick and stirred with all his might. It's time to eat. Unknowingly, Li ran to the kitchen. When she came back and saw Ning Chen was still stirring, she shouted from afar. I'm busy. Help me get some food. Ning Chen was busy and couldn't leave. He casually shouted. No, I'll starve you to death. Li still remembered Ning Chen's poisonous tongue and refused without hesitation. After waiting for a while, seeing that Ning Chen still didn't have the intention to eat, Li pouted and left angrily. About half an hour later, Li was full. She held a bowl of food in her hand and reluctantly came back. It's time to eat. Li shouted from afar. Ning Chen was busy and didn't notice. It's time to eat. Li shouted again. Ning Chen was still busy with his own things and didn't pay much attention. Li's pretty face was angry. She pinched her nose and ran to Ning Chen's side. She put down the food and then shouted in his ear with all her might. It's time to eat. The little girl's voice was very loud. It scared Ning Chen so much that he trembled and almost knocked over the big bowl with the stick. Right away, right away. Ning Chen replied and continued with his work. This was a crucial moment and he couldn't leave. The food is going to get cold soon. Li saw that Ning Chen was still not eating and pouted. She said, You eat. I'll help you stir the food first. Ning Chen looked at Li in surprise. This little girl was still in a bad mood just now. Why was she so easy to talk to now? However, he felt that his stomach was growling and didn't think much about it. He passed the wooden stick in his hand over and instructed, Then be careful. Don't stir it over. I know. You're long-winded. Li took the wooden stick, pinched her nose, and stirred seriously. Ning Chen looked at the little girl. She didn't go far. She sat at the side and ate the still hot food. Gradually, his eyes became sore and his mouth salty. Why are you crying? Li took a glance and asked in surprise. No, the smell is too strong. Ning Chen rubbed his eyes and grinned. Then sit further away. It's okay. I'm used to it. Eating the rice in the bowl, Ning Chen's heart felt warm. This little girl was so kind. Even if she looked a little unruly, it was just a pretense to protect him. Okay, I'm full. It's my turn. After finishing the rice in a few mouthfuls, Ning Chen went forward and took the wooden stick. He then pushed the little girl to the side. Li help me bring the bowl back. I'll show you something when I come back. You'll order me around. Li took the bowl reluctantly and walked back to the kitchen. She really wanted to know what Ning Chen was doing now. It's almost done. After a while, Ning Chen saw that the lard and plant ash in the big bowl had basically reacted. The unpleasant smell from before was also gone. He was in a good mood. His luck was not bad. Is it done? Li asked expectantly. It's done. Ning Chen extinguished the fire and poured the half-solidified lard into the layers of waste cloth that he had prepared earlier. He wrapped it tightly and then squeezed hard, squeezing all the unreacted lard into the waste cloth. After a while, a white thing with a light brown color condensed in the waste cloth. Ning Chen looked at the result of his labor and was so happy that he could not close his mouth. What is this? It's so ugly. Seeing that the thing that she had been looking forward to was actually like this, Li was very disappointed and pouted. Ning Chen's face turned slightly red. The color and shape were not his strong points. It was indeed a little ugly. Little girl, what do you know? This is good stuff. Follow me. In order to save his face, Ning Chen decided to broaden Li's horizons and establish his tall image. Li followed Ning Chen into the house doubtfully to see what tricks he was playing. Li give me your hand. Ning Chen smiled slyly. It did not look like something good was going to happen. What are you doing? Li asked worriedly, but she still obediently extended her hand. Hee. Ning Chen smiled slyly. He quickly smeared the lard on his hand onto Li's hand. In the blink of an eye, the little girl's fair and beautiful hand was stained with dirty little claws. Ah, what are you doing? Your hands are so dirty. Li's face changed. She quickly retracted her hands, but it was still too late. You're bullying me. Looking at her hands full of oil, Li's eyes turned red. She looked as if she was crying. Her aggrieved look made one's heart ache. Li don't cry. I'm just playing with you. Seeing that the little girl was really crying, Ning Chen immediately panicked. He apologized and coaxed her helplessly. Li did not make a sound. Her tears fell from her eyes. Her delicate little face was full of grievance. Li be good. Don't cry. I'll wash it for you now, okay? Ning Chen quickly pulled the little girl to the side of the wooden basin and comforted her gently. Li did not make a sound and continued to cry silently. Ning Chen had a headache. He quickly put his hands in the water and rubbed them twice. He soaped his hands and rubbed them carefully. Then, he washed his hands in the water. Without taking a towel, Ning Chen rubbed the water on his body. Then, he put his hands in front of the little girl and said gently, "Look, didn't I wash it all off?" Li was attracted by this magical scene and forgot to cry. She looked at Ning Chen's hands and then looked at the dirty water in the basin. Her little brain could not understand what was going on. Seeing that the little girl was no longer crying, Ning Chen quickly poured the water away and changed it to a basin of clean water. Li try it too. Li put her hands into the water doubtfully. Then, like Ning Chen, she soaped her hands and rubbed them. Then, she washed them in the water. Come, wipe the water on me. Ning Chen looked around and found a towel. He smiled and said. Li smiled through her tears. She pouted and really wiped her hands on Ning Chen's clothes. Her dirty hands disappeared and turned into beautiful white hands. Li stretched out her hands and stopped smiling. She pretended to be angry and said, "Give this to me." Ning Chen's face showed a hint of pain. He hesitated for a while and bargained, "Leave half for me." Li did not make a sound. Her face was still tense and she did not take back her hands. 1/3. 1/4. In the end, Ning Chen did not keep anything and gave it all to Li. Looking at the back view of the little girl leaving happily, he could not help but smile. The painful expression disappeared. He made this soap for Li. As for using it to make money, he did not even think about it. If he made some novel things and got noticed by others, and accidentally passed it to Zhang Xuan's ears, then he was really tired of living. For the sake of his life, he had to continue to keep a low profile. Chapter 17. For 3 days in a row, Ning Chen did laundry and did odd jobs in the backyard of the Lingyan Pavilion. He never went to the front hall. Other than Li Er, who came to talk to him from time to time, the others rarely came to the backyard. The front hall's luxury and the rear courtyard's desolation would form a stark contrast when night fell. The moment the lanterns were lit, the Lingyan Pavilion would display its most flourishing aspect. The red light district was always a warm and tender place where men would linger and forget to return. At this time, the backyard was the quietest. Ning Chen liked to look at the stars. He always felt that there was a star in the sky that was his home. Although he couldn't find it yet, he would find it sooner or later. He was puzzled. Where did he come to? If this was not the original Earth, why could he still see the starry night guarding the heart, which should only be seen on Earth? Looking at the stars in the sky, Ning Chen's eyes were confused. His heart was even more confused. The starry sky, the crescent moon, how could he not see the most familiar blue memory? Tired of looking and counting, Ning Chen shifted his gaze to the moon in the sky. He carefully looked at it. The moon in this world was indeed different from the one in his previous world. It had a faint red color. It looked like it was covered with a layer of blood fog. It was so illusory that it was somewhat unreal. It was said that this world was created by the gods, and the moon in the sky was created by the ancient creator god. The eternal night cult believed in the only god in the legend, and always believed that the god would come again one day. Ning Chen didn't like this legend. If the gods really existed, then what was the belief that he firmly believed in his previous life? The gods were more valuable in legends. The human world didn't need gods. The cultivation method that Mu Qingxue gave him was not very smooth. There were too many parts that he couldn't understand. He practiced the parts that he could understand for a few days, but he didn't feel any effect. However, he believed that with accumulation, the effect would show. Sure enough, on the fourth day, he could feel a slight flow of air flowing along his meridians. Every time it circulated, the flow of air would slightly increase. Ning Chen was overjoyed. He was indeed a peerless genius that appeared once in 100 years. However, he didn't know that Zhen Yuan needed moves to be effective. It was recorded on the golden paper. Unfortunately, he couldn't understand it. Mu Qingxue's original intention was to strengthen his body. Thus, even though he knew that other than the first few lines, he would not be able to understand the rest, he did not intend to teach him. Ning Chen didn't mind. It wasn't that he was open-minded, but that he didn't know about this at all. Anyway, he knew that his practice was effective, so he didn't care about anything else. Just like this, he worked during the day and cultivated at night. He had been tossing and turning for nearly half a month. Ning Chen enjoyed the peace and quiet, but he didn't know that something big had already happened outside. Li Er still came over every day to bicker with him as usual. Unfortunately, in the face of Ning Chen's poisonous tongue, she was undoubtedly defeated every time. Sometimes, she was so angry that she would fiercely bite him with her little canine teeth and then happily run back to the front hall. Ning Chen didn't know how many teeth marks there were on his arm, but every time she didn't learn her lesson. With just a few words, the little girl was so angry that her teeth itched. The bickering between the two had become a common occurrence. Even if she was angry the day before, it couldn't stop Li Er's enthusiasm to run to the back hall. Once, she talked about the big news that was spreading outside. Ning Chen was stunned for a while, but finally he threw it to the back of his mind. He had already come out, so these things had nothing to do with him. Let Zhang Sun and the others have a headache. However, after 2 days, Ning Chen found out one thing that really gave him a headache. His only shoe was scrapped. When he ran away, he had brought a change of clothes, but forgot to bring shoes. This pair of shoes had lasted for so long, but finally they were sacrificed. This time, he had no choice but to go out. However, he had no money. The shopkeeper had given him back to Yuhani. He didn't have any money now. Not to mention shoes, he couldn't even afford to buy insoles. Since there was nothing to do in the morning, Ning Chen went to the front hall. He looked left and right, looking for Yu Honey's figure. Hey, what are you doing? Li saw Ning Chen come early in the morning and fiercely asked him. I want a salary, Ning Chen said confidently. He had worked for so many days, so he couldn't not be paid a single penny. Li looked at Ning Chen as if she had discovered a new continent. She said in disbelief, you actually have the nerve to ask for a salary. Hee, Ning Chen smiled guiltily. He knew that he was in the wrong, but he couldn't just not ask for a salary. He had simply sewed the shoes, but it wouldn't last for more than a few days. Sister Yi is not here. You should wait for her to come back. Li was defeated by Ning Chen's thick skin. She didn't expect that other than his mouth, his skin was also so shocking. Then Li lend me some money first. It's urgent. Ning Chen struggled for a moment, but finally he asked embarrassedly. It was shameful that he had fallen to the point of borrowing money from a little girl. What? Li was startled at first, then looked at the former suspiciously, as if guarding against a swindler. Looking at Li's eyes, Ning Chen felt that his dignity was insulted. He said angrily, what kind of eyes are you looking at me with? I'm just borrowing money to buy a pair of shoes. Do I look like the kind of person who doesn't return the money? Li lowered her head and looked at Ning Chen's shoes. She thought for a moment and asked, you want to go out and buy shoes? Yes. Ning Chen nodded his head vigorously. Wait a moment. As soon as she finished speaking, Li ran to her room. After she took the silver, she gave some instructions to a few maidservants before she skipped back to her room. All right, let's go. You're going too? Ning Chen asked curiously. Li looked at the former with disdain and said, you owe 100 silver taels. If you run away, how am I going to explain to Sister Yi when she comes back? Ning Chen was speechless. Was he that kind of person? Was he? The Lingyan Pavilion was located at the most prosperous place in the imperial city. Ning Chen was dazzled by the sight. Li followed behind him and stared at him cautiously, afraid that he would run away. Li I already said that I won't run away. Ning Chen stopped and turned back to repeat himself helplessly. He didn't know how many times he had said this, but Li just didn't believe him. That's hard to say. Li didn't believe Ning Chen's words at all. 100 silver taels was enough to buy several of her. Since the little girl didn't believe him, Ning Chen couldn't do anything and just let her follow behind him. After walking for a long time, Ning Chen's body suddenly stopped. His expression stiffened as if he had seen a ghost. Li didn't expect Ning Chen to suddenly stop and bumped into him carelessly. She immediately held her red forehead in pain and her face was filled with anger. What are you doing? Don't talk. Ning Chen came back to his senses and hurriedly covered the little girl's mouth. He half pulled and half dragged her to the fortune-telling booth at the side to block his body. Using the fortune-telling booth as a cover, Ning Chen carefully looked in front and didn't even dare to breathe loudly. Why was she here? Woo-woo. At the side, Li's mouth and nose were covered. She couldn't breathe properly and struggled with a red face. When Ning Chen saw this, he hurriedly let go and revealed an embarrassed expression. He had almost forgotten about the little girl. Do you want to suffocate me to death? Li took several deep breaths. She was extremely angry and she fiercely hammered him. Shoo, lower your voice. Ning Chen put a finger on his lips and shushed her. He guiltily looked at the beautiful figure in front of him and prayed in his heart that he wouldn't be discovered. What's wrong? Li was attracted by Ning Chen's gaze and looked over, but she didn't find anything strange. An enemy is chasing after me. Ning Chen casually made up a lie. If he was caught, even if he didn't die, he would still lose a layer of skin. Does young master want to have your fortune told? You can't do it without money. At this time, the middle-aged fortune teller at the booth asked. I don't have money. Ning Chen refused without hesitation. Trying to trick him? Don't even think about it. I can help young master read your fortune for free. The middle-aged fortune teller smiled and didn't mind. Ning Chen ignored him and continued to observe the enemy. Why hadn't this great aunt left yet? She couldn't have been sent by Zhang Sun to catch him, right? Young master, are you hiding from someone? The middle-aged fortune teller smiled. Nonsense. Ning Chen replied disdainfully. Even a blind person could see that. A woman. The middle-aged fortune teller added. Yes. Ning Chen was still unmoved. In this world, there were only men and women. If it wasn't a man, then it was a woman. It wasn't strange for him to guess correctly. From the palace. The middle-aged fortune teller continued. Ning Chen first responded, but then he was stunned. He looked at the great hoodwinker in front of him in surprise. He had some ability to even guess correctly. Young master, is what I said correct? The middle-aged fortune teller asked with a chuckle. Ha! Ning Chen gave a perfunctory laugh. What was there to be proud of? Just because he got it right twice, he thought he was a divine fortune teller. Fuck, this signboard really did say that he was a divine fortune teller. When the middle-aged fortune teller saw that Ning Chen still didn't believe him, he continued, Young master, forgive me for being blunt. Sometimes, fate is inevitable. If it's not destined, don't force it. Cause and effect are determined by the heavens. It's not something that you can hide from just because you want to. After waiting for a while, Ning Chen saw that the beautiful figure had finally left. He heaved a sigh of relief and looked at the fortune teller. He pointed at his nose and said, Tell me where I'm from. The middle-aged fortune teller was stunned. From your accent, you should be from the capital. Bullshit, I'm from Earth. After saying that, Ning Chen pulled Li and quickly left. They couldn't stay here any longer. If they were caught, they would be in trouble. Li was confused by the conversation between the two and still hadn't reacted. Seeing Ning Chen walking back, she subconsciously asked, Why are you going back? Aren't you going to buy shoes? I'm not buying any more. My life is more important. Ning Chen replied nervously. Oh. Li didn't know what was going on, but when she saw how nervous the former was, she still obediently followed him back. When they reached the Lingyan pavilion, Ning Chen looked left and right. Seeing that no one was paying attention, he pulled Li and ran in. Then, he heaved a sigh of relief. That was close. Luckily, he had good eyesight. You must be tired. Have a cup of tea. In the midst of a soft and moving voice, a cup of tea was handed to him. Ning Chen's mouth was dry. Without thinking, he took the cup and drank it in one gulp. He also thanked her while he was at it. Thank you. PFFF. When the tea entered his mouth, Ning Chen suddenly spat it out. He trembled as he turned around and said with a trembling voice, Sister. Sister Qing Ning. You hid in a good place. It took me a while to find you. Qing Ning replied indifferently. Her beautiful face didn't show any anger, but it still scared Ning Chen so much that he didn't even dare to breathe loudly. Ning Chen remembered very clearly that when he ran away, he tied Qing Ning up. He had offended this great aunt. This time, he was dead meat. His mind turned again and again, thinking of how to escape. But when he thought of Qing Ning's skills, he dispelled these suicidal thoughts. Alright, you've been out for so many days. You've played enough. It's time to go back with me. Qing Ning glanced at Ning Chen. The warning in her eyes was very clear. If he didn't listen, don't blame her for being impolite. Ning Chen's heart trembled. He asked tentatively, Nyang is angry. What do you think? Qing Ning was so angry that she laughed. This guy still had the nerve to ask. When Ningchen heard this, his head immediately shook like a rattle drum. If I don't go back, Nyang Nyang will chop off my head. Now you know how to be afraid. Qing Ning wanted to slap this guy to death. Falsifying the Empress's imperial edict, stealing objects from the palace, and secretly escaping from the palace. Every one of these crimes was a capital offense. This guy was good. All of a sudden, all of them. I know. Ning Chen hurriedly nodded. Seeing Ning Chen's nervous appearance, Qing Ning didn't want to scare him. Her tone softened a little. Come back with me first. Nyang Nyang has already suppressed this matter in order to save your little life. When you go back, properly apologize to Nyang Nyang. As for how to deal with it, that will depend on Nyang Nyang's mood. Chapter 18. Ning Chen thought for a while and felt that if he went back to the palace now, he would most likely be beaten. Zhang Sun was in a fit of anger. If he went back now, wouldn't he be looking for a beating? Suddenly, Ning Chen remembered what Li told him 2 days ago. He rolled his eyes and walked to Qing Ning. He whispered, Sister Qing Ning, I have something to tell you. Qing Ning frowned and said, Say it. Ning Chen leaned close to Qing Ning's ear and smelled the orchid-like fragrance on her body. He put away the messy thoughts in his mind and said a few words seriously. Are you serious? Qing Ning's expression became serious and said seriously. 100%. Ning Chen nodded and said with certainty. Okay, I'll go back and report first. As for your request, I can't make the decision. It depends on Her Majesty. This matter was very important. Qing Ning wanted to go back to the palace. After taking 2 steps, she stopped and looked at Ning Chen. She warned, Stay here and don't think about running away. Of course, of course. Ning Chen quickly nodded and pretended to be obedient. In his heart, he was thinking whether he should run away quickly. It seemed too unreliable to wait for Zhang Suan's order. After Qing Ning left, Ning Chen pulled Li who was already stunned, to the back hall. Who are you? Li broke free from Ning Chen's hand and took 2 steps back. Her eyes were red. Lower your voice. Ning Chen looked left and right and said cautiously. Don't treat me like an idiot. That lady is obviously not an ordinary person. Furthermore, you all keep mentioning the word Empress. Don't tell me that it's just a name. As she spoke, tears fell from Li Er's eyes uncontrollably. Ning Chen didn't know what to do. He couldn't watch the little girl cry on the street. That would be too beastly. He had no choice but to roughly tell her what happened when he entered and left the palace. Of course, he hid the matter of the fake eunuch and Mu Qingxue. He tactfully disguised the process of entering the palace. As for running away, he couldn't say anything. He said that he was following orders to leave the palace, but he didn't dare to go back because he messed up. It wasn't that he wanted to hide it, but this matter involved not only himself. Once it was exposed, the people who knew about it would not have a good ending. Then why did she go back by herself just now? Li asked while sobbing, forgetting that she was still angry after listening to the story. Ning Chen patted the little lass's head and said softly, Didn't you tell me 2 days ago that the emissary from Jinji State had given Great Xia a difficult question? I proposed to use the answer in exchange for the grace of leaving the palace. At the end of his speech, Ning Chen was in a bad mood. The feeling of not being able to control his own fate was hard to accept. However, the reality was that he was far from being able to control his own future. Did you really solve the problem of the messenger of the true extreme nation? Li didn't hear the helplessness in Ning Chen's words, but she was very surprised by the answer. In her opinion, the problem posed by the messenger of the true extreme kingdom was simply impossible to solve. Ning Chen calmed himself down and replied with a smile, There is no perfect person or thing in the world. Everything that is perfect is just a scam waiting to be cracked. The problem of the emissary of the Jinji kingdom seems to be unsolvable, but in fact, it is full of loopholes. Everyone can do it. Even I can't do it. Li pouted and said unwillingly. That's because you're stupid. Ning Chen smiled and teased. The emissary of the true extreme nation came to Great Xia. After nearly half a month of wrangling, he stated his purpose of coming. This trip was to ask for a princess of Great Xia for the emperor of the true extreme nation. Originally, this wasn't a big deal. There were many women of suitable age in the royal family. Normally, as long as the Xia emperor bestowed the title of princess, it would be enough. However, the emissary of the true extreme nation requested that the bride must be a princess of the Xia emperor. This was no small matter. Prince Xia had many daughters, but there was only one princess who was truly to be married. That was the 9th princess, Xia Xinyu. Back then, the imperial noble concubine had unfortunately passed away after giving birth to the 9th princess. The eldest grandson couldn't bear it and raised the two of them personally, always treating them as his own. Xia Xinyu had just turned 16 this year. She had inherited the looks of the imperial noble concubine and was born slim and graceful. She could be said to be the brightest pearl of Great Xia. The request of the emissary of the true extreme nation made the Xia emperor furious. However, he also felt somewhat helpless. Now, Great Xia was facing many external threats. The Gu Meng court in the north could send troops at any time. The eternal night cult in the west was always waiting for an opportunity to encroach on the central plains. Although Great Xia was strong, it couldn't afford to send troops on 3 fronts. What made the Xia emperor even more unbearable was that while the emissary of the true extreme nation was asking for a marriage, he also requested that the Xia emperor cede Bai Ruoyuan, which was at the border between the two nations, as a dowry for the princess. Everyone knew that Bai Ruoyuan was the most important source of iron ore for Great Xia. 40% of the iron ore used in the weapons and armor of the Great Xia soldiers came from there. Once Bai Ruoyuan was ceded, it would mean that Great Xia was cutting off its own lifeline. The Xia emperor naturally wouldn't agree and flatly refused. Of course, the emissary of the true extreme nation wasn't stupid enough to think that the Xia emperor would agree to such a rude request. His goal wasn't that. After a round of bargaining, both sides took a step back. The emissary of the true extreme nation proposed a wager of 20,000 warhorses. He raised 3 difficult questions about courage, wisdom, and luck. If Great Xia lost, they didn't need to cede Bai Ruoyuan. However, they had to give up the right to use Bai Ruoyuan for 3 years. The emissary of the true extreme nation used the method of taking a step back in order to advance. He took advantage of Great Xia's unwillingness to go to war and purposely spread the news of the wager to put pressure on Great Xia. As long as it was appropriate, Great Xia would have no choice but to compromise. As expected, the Xia emperor agreed. At the same time, he added a condition. If the true extreme nation lost the wager, the Xia emperor would have to choose the princess to marry. The emissary of the true extreme nation didn't have any objections. Their goal was Bai Ruoyuan. As for marrying the princess, it was just an excuse. The Xia emperor also had his own considerations. 90% of the reason why Great Xia was so afraid of the northern Meng court was because of their iron cavalry. Although Great Xia was strong, they had a fatal weakness. Great Xia didn't have horses. It wasn't that they didn't have ordinary horses, but rather that they didn't have war horses. The northern Meng court lived as nomads, and their people were valiant. They were good at riding and shooting. Their unique Fergana horse was a rare breed, and the production rate of warhorses was very high. In this aspect, Great Xia was much worse. Their warhorse production rate was less than 10%. 20,000 warhorses was almost half of the true extreme nation's stockpile. It would be a great relief to Great Xia's shortage of warhorses. However, what the Xia emperor didn't expect was that Great Xia would be defeated in just the first round of the competition of courage. It wasn't that Great Xia lacked loyal and brave people, but that the problem posed by the emissary of the true extreme nation wasn't something that could be solved by ordinary people. Boiling oil to remove the needle, and the person to remove the needle had to be decided by the other party. This wasn't a problem of courage, because no one could use a crippled hand to pick up an embroidery needle that was as thin as a hair. The officials of Great Xia had tried countless times, but it was simply impossible. Great Xia had no lack of smart people. They had tried adding water, wine, and even vinegar to the oil, but they all failed in the end. The emissary of the true extreme nation only gave Great Xia 3 days. Tomorrow was the final deadline, so Qing Ning hurried back to the palace after receiving Ning Chen's promise. In Weiyang Palace, Zhang Sun hadn't slept for 2 days and 2 nights because of the emissary of the true extreme nation. Seeing Qing Ning return, he wasn't in the mood to ask about Ning Chen. Qing Ning had left the palace 5 days ago, and this was the first time she saw Zhang Sun. When she saw his haggard appearance, she couldn't bear to see him like this. Knowing what Zhang Sun was worried about, she went forward and tactfully told him what Ning Chen had said. Bang! After hearing this, Zhang Sun suddenly slammed the table and furrowed his brows. He said sternly, "What time is it now? He's still talking about conditions with me. Go and bring him back. If he resists, just knock him out and bring him back." "Yes," Qing Ning replied. She didn't dare delay and immediately rushed to the Lingyan Pavilion. At the same time, in the Lingyan Pavilion, Yuhani came directly to the back hall after returning. She found Ning Chen and told him that she had come for the method of making soap. Ning Chen looked at Li. He was surprised and felt complicated at the same time. It was difficult to express. "I won't say anything," Ning Chen refused without hesitation. There was no room for discussion. 10% will belong to the young master, Yuhani seriously promised. Ning Chen was unmoved and remained silent. 20%. 30%. Seeing that Ning Chen was still unmoved, Yuhani frowned and said in a low voice, 40%, no more. Ning Chen sneered and said word by word, "I'll say it again, I won't say anything." Yuhani's eyes narrowed at first, then she smiled and said softly, "Since the young master is unwilling, this little girl can't force you." On the side, Li was secretly anxious. She couldn't figure out why Ning Chen was so stubborn. She secretly pulled on the corner of Yuhani's clothes, her eyes full of pleading. Yuhani sighed, "I know that the young master has some opinions about Hani. If this little girl hasn't guessed wrong, the young master should think that the Lingyan Pavilion is restricting the freedom of these women, so your attitude towards Hani has changed. But does the young master know how many brothels there are in the imperial city, and how many women are slaves? In comparison, in the Lingyan Pavilion, they can at least choose whether they want to sell their bodies or not." At this point, Yuhani glanced at Li, and her beautiful face flashed with tender affection. She continued, "Someone like Li, who was sold to a brothel since she was young and had no one to rely on, where could she go after leaving the Lingyan Pavilion?" Li's eyes were red as she walked in front of Ning Chen and pulled on the latter's arm. She timidly apologized, "I'm sorry, I just wanted you and Sister Yi to reconcile, so I gave the soap to Sister Yi." Li, be good, I'm not angry." Ning Chen raised his hand and rubbed the little girl's hair, then looked up at Yuhani and said, "I can give you the method to make soap, and it's not the kind you learned from Li, but the real way to make soap. But I have a request." Hearing this, Yuhani and Li were both shocked, especially Yuhani. She was much more knowledgeable than Li, so she naturally knew the value of the soap. Now that she heard it, Ning Chen seemed to be holding back. "Don't be surprised, I just used that soap to make Li happy. It's okay to make it for fun, but if you make it in large quantities, there will be many problems that can't be solved." Then, Ning Chen explained the real way to make soap, including how to use stones to burn quicklime, then to make slaked lime, then to refine caustic soda, and finally to make soap with caustic soda and lard. After a while, Yuhani and Li were in a daze, as if they didn't understand. Seeing this situation, Ning Chen asked for a pen and paper, and wrote down the process in detail. He added the necessary diagrams, and then handed it to Yuhani. After looking at it for a long time, Yuhani finally understood the mystery and couldn't help but sigh. The young master is really a strange person. False reputation. The young master is too modest. You're welcome. Although the words were modest, Ning Chen's head was almost raised to the sky. What he meant was, praise me, continue to praise me. Yuhani found it funny. In the end, he was still a young man. After being awkward, he was a little silly and cute. Ning Chen, let's go back to the palace. At this time, a cold and beautiful figure walked over. In just a few steps, she was in front of Ning Chen, grabbed his shoulder, and left. Chapter 19. Ning Chen knew what it was like to fly a kite, and this wasn't the first time. He had been caught in a daze, and by the time he had reacted, he was already back in the palace. Ning Chen was filled with regret. He hadn't even had the time to state his request. If he had known this would happen, he would have negotiated with Yuhani first. Now he had lost everything. Seeing that Ning Chen was still distracted, Qing Ning had an urge to kick him. She warned, the Empress is still angry, so be careful what you say. Ning Chen responded and immediately reacted. He was a little nervous. Zhang Sun wouldn't really hit him with the plank, would he? Sister Qing Ning, you have to say a good word for me. Ning Chen shamelessly begged. Now you know how to be afraid. Why didn't you think of the consequences when you ran away? Ha! Ning Chen awkwardly laughed. How could he have known he would be caught so easily? Sister Qing Ning, how did you find me? Ning Chen curiously asked. Qing Ning didn't hide anything and honestly said, today on the street, I already saw you before you hid from me. The only reason I didn't immediately catch you was because I wanted to see where you had been hiding these past few days. Ning Chen regretted it so much that he wanted to slap himself. He had delivered himself to her doorstep. Why had he bought shoes? Couldn't he just endure for a few days? Let's go. The Empress is still waiting. Qing Ning was still worried, and she quickly walked forward. Although Ning Chen was unwilling, he could only follow. This time he couldn't avoid it. No matter how Zhang Sun punished him, he could only grit his teeth and endure. Weiyang Palace was as calm as usual. Zhang Sun sat in the main seat, her beautiful face carrying a bit of exhaustion. Compared to the past few days, she looked much more haggard. She had not slept for 2 days straight, and that was slowly destroying her remaining radiance. Beside Zhang Sun stood a beautiful figure. She was around 16 or 17 years old, and she wore a light purple dress. Her skin was whiter than snow, and her eyebrows were picturesque. Her eyes were like limpid autumn waters. Ning Chen followed Qing Ning in. When he saw the girl beside Zhang Sun, he was also stunned. It was no wonder people said that the 9th princess was a beauty that could cause the downfall of a nation. She was more beautiful than a flower. Femme fatale. Ning Chen secretly muttered. He was thinking too far ahead and accidentally got distracted again. At the side, Qing Ning was so angry that she was speechless. She wanted to remind Ning Chen, but she didn't want to overstep her boundaries in front of the 9th princess. Boom! Zhang Sun suddenly slapped the table. With a crash, the tea spilled all over the floor. You still know to come back. Zhang Sun got up and shouted angrily. Ning Chen's body trembled, and he was startled. Only then did he come back to his senses, and he raised his head to look at Zhang Sun. However, when he met Zhang Sun's angry gaze, he immediately lowered his head in guilt. I know I was wrong. Ning Chen was incomparably sincere as he guiltily admitted his mistake. Beside her eldest grandson, Xia Xinyu was also shocked. This was the first time in her life that she had seen her mother so angry. Out of curiosity, she couldn't help but glance at Ning Chen. Seeing the guilt on Ning Chen's face, Zhang Sun suppressed his anger and said, Tell me, what did you do wrong? Ning Chen thought for a moment, then said in a low voice, I shouldn't have tied up Qing Ning Jia, and I shouldn't have taken an artifact from the palace without permission. Even more so, I shouldn't have faked Her Highness's decree and sneaked out of the palace. After saying this, Ning Chen carefully thought about it again, afraid that he would forget something and make Zhang Sun angry again. I shouldn't have haggled with Her Highness and refused to return to the palace. After saying this, Ning Chen looked towards Qing Ning. Afraid that he would miss out on something he didn't know about, he quietly mouthed, anything else? Qing Ning turned her face away and pretended not to see. Good, very good. If you didn't say it, this consort really wouldn't have known that you've made so many mistakes. Hearing Ning Chen admit to his crimes, Zhang Sun was so angry that her chest heaved up and down. Her expression was as unsightly as it could be. Even Xia Xinyu was dumbstruck by Ning Chen's list of crimes. With so many crimes, any one of them was enough for him to die at least once. With so many crimes piled up, even if he didn't die of 1,000 cuts, it wouldn't be too bad. Tell me, how should this consort punish you? Zhang Sun said in a low voice. Ning Chen was put in a difficult position. He definitely couldn't tell the truth. He didn't want to be cut into pieces. He looked towards Qing Ning for help. Big sister, plead for leniency. Qing Ning's heart softened. She glared at Ning Chen, but still took a step forward and said softly, Her Highness, Ning Chen also knows that he was wrong. Right now, the matter of the envoy of true extreme nation is more important. How about we give him a chance to redeem himself? Zhang Sun pretended to hesitate as she thought about it. Soon after, she nodded slightly. She originally didn't have any intention of chopping off Ning Chen's head. It was just that this guy was too good at causing trouble. If she didn't give him a beating, she really wouldn't be able to vent her anger. She never would have thought that this brat actually dared to sneak out of the palace on his own when she didn't agree to his request to leave the palace. In the end, he actually succeeded. Zhang Sun looked towards Ning Chen. Her tone softened slightly as she said, since even Qing Ning is pleading for leniency for you, this consort will temporarily let you off this time. However, while the death penalty can be forgiven, you can't escape punishment. Since you want to leave the palace so badly, this consort will punish you by confining you for half a year. For half a year, you're not allowed to take half a step out of Wei Yang Palace. Half a year. Ning Chen smacked his lips gloomily. However, he didn't dare to have any objection. He still wanted to express his gratitude and said, Thank you, Your Highness, for your grace. The punishment was loud but light. The 9th princess was already so surprised that she didn't know how to express her feelings. Compared to the mistake made by this little eunuch, confining him for half a year was really not a punishment. After dealing with this matter, Zhang Sun collected her emotions and turned her attention back to the matter of the envoy of the Jinji nation. This is the 9th princess. You haven't met her yet, Zhang Sun introduced seriously. 9th princess, nice to meet you, Ning Chen bowed and saluted. Xia Xinyu saw such a salute and greeting for the first time. Suddenly, she didn't know how to respond. On the main seat, the anger that Zhang Sun had just suppressed almost rose again. Qing Ning, teach him proper etiquette during his confinement period. What nonsense is he talking about? Yes, Qing Ning answered softly and said helplessly. Zhang Sun stretched out her hand slightly and then looked at Ning Chen. She said seriously, Ning Chen, you said before that you can solve the problem of the envoy of the Jinji nation. Is it true? Hearing this, Xia Xinyu's delicate body trembled slightly. She looked at the little eunuch who had surprised her several times. It was really hard to believe that he could solve the problem that made everyone feel helpless. Absolutely. Ning Chen couldn't stand being stared at by Zhang Sun and the 9th princess, so he answered honestly. What do you need? Zhang Sun had a glimmer of hope in her heart. She knew that although this little guy had a lot of problems, he was really smart. At the critical moment, he could always impress people. A pot of oil, vinegar, and a kettle that has been used before, Ning Chen said seriously. Qing Ning, send someone to get it, Zhang Sun ordered immediately. Yes. Qing Ning took the order and then left quickly. Taking advantage of the leisure time, Zhang Sun expressed her doubts and reminded him, the method of adding vinegar to oil has been tried, and it has been confirmed that it is not feasible. It is indeed not feasible, Ning Chen nodded and said. Later generations said that taking things out of oil was because vinegar was added to the oil. When the vinegar boiled, the temperature of the oil was only 40 or 50 degrees. Every time Ning Chen heard such nonsense, he wanted to slap them. In these rumors, many people swore that vinegar would boil at 60 degrees Celsius or even 30 degrees Celsius. This could no longer be described as nonsense. In fact, one could easily figure out that it was normal for the temperature to reach 40 degrees Celsius in the summer. However, who had ever seen the vinegar in the house boil on its own? In fact, most of the vinegar was only acetic acid and water. The boiling point of acetic acid was more than 110 degrees, and the boiling point of water was 100 degrees lower. The mixture of the two would boil at least 100 degrees. If someone put his hand in the vinegar at this time, even a piece of beef would be cooked, let alone a human's hand. Fortunately, he didn't believe in this nonsense legend. Otherwise, if he angered Zhang Sun again, he would really suffer. After waiting for a while, the little eunuchs and maids in the Weiyang palace set up the pot of oil in the yard. Qing Ning came in and invited them, and then dismissed all the maids and eunuchs. Zhang Sun and Xia Xinyu walked into the yard to see what method Ning Chen had. There was still a fire under the pot of oil. Ning Chen didn't waste any time. He took the kettle and scraped the dirt off. Then, he broke it into small pieces and threw it into the pot of oil. Finally, he poured the vinegar into the pot. Ning Chen took 2 steps back and stood to the side, waiting in boredom. It's that simple? Zhang Sun asked in surprise. It's that simple. Ning Chen nodded honestly. It wasn't anything troublesome to begin with. As expected, not long after, bubbles began to appear in the pot. There were more and more of them, and they grew bigger and bigger. Your Highness, why don't you try? Ning Chen suggested. Zhang Sun walked forward, half believing and half doubting. She put her hand on top of the pot of oil. After feeling that it really wasn't hot, she put her hand in. The oil was just a bit hot. Only then did Zhang Sun truly believe him. Her emotions were extremely complicated. The problem that had troubled them for 2 days was actually solved so easily. This kind of contrast caused her to not know how to describe her feelings for a moment. Alright, return to your room and confine yourself. This consort and the 9th princess still have things to discuss. After a moment, Zhang Sun came back to her senses. She picked up a handkerchief and lightly wiped the oil off her hand. As you command. Ning Chen nodded gloomily. This really was getting rid of the donkey after it had left the millstone. Burning the bridge after crossing the river, bullying others with power, the rich were heartless. Seeing Ning Chen dejectedly leave, a faint smile finally appeared on Zhang Sun's beautiful face. She glanced at Xia Xinyu and softly said, now you can relax. And, many thanks Imperial Mother. The stone in Xia Xinyu's heart was temporarily put down. Her mood was much better now. She smiled sweetly and said softly. Qing Ning, look after this brat. Don't let him run away again. Even though she was gratified, Zhang Sun was still worried. This little guy was too strange. She was very sure that as long as there was a chance, this brat would definitely secretly run away again. They were already lucky to be able to find him this time. If they let him run away again, with this brat's personality, he would definitely hide somewhere they wouldn't be able to find him again. N. Qing Ning softly replied. After instructing Qing Ning, Zhang Sun looked at her daughter beside her and carefully instructed, Xinyu, what happened today, you must not tell anyone else, understand? Xinyu understands. Xia Xinyu lightly nodded and said seriously. Alright, I'm also tired. You can go back first. Qing Ning, send the princess off. After instructing everything, Zhang Sun could no longer hide the tiredness in her eyes. She waved her hand and said, "Then daughter will take her leave." Xia Xinyu bowed and immediately left. Qing Ning solemnly followed Zhang Sun's order and left with the 9th princess. Outside Wei Yang Palace, Xia Xinyu looked at Qing Ning and finally couldn't help but ask curiously, "Elder sister Qing Ning, what is Ning Chen's background? Why did Imperial Mother let him off so easily?" Qing Ning was silent for a moment and said, "This servant can only say that last time when Imperial Mother was attacked outside the palace, if it wasn't for Ning Chen, Imperial Mother might not have been able to return. As for the other reasons, Princess can only personally ask Imperial Mother." Speaking up to hear, Qing Ning hesitated for a moment before continuing, "Princess, Ning Chen just entered the palace not long ago and is not clear about the rules of the palace. In the future, if he unintentionally offends Princess, I hope that Princess can be magnanimous and not hold it against him." Xia Xinyu nodded. In her heart, she was even more curious. She was very clear about Qing Ning's personality. Although she was kind, she was actually very hard to get close to. Other than Imperial Mother, this was the first time she saw Qing Ning care so much about someone. It seemed that she needed to tell Imperial Brother about this person who had given her so many surprises. Chapter 20. The moon was bright and the stars were sparse. The night breeze was cool. In Weiyang Palace, Ning Chen was sitting on his bed, practicing the cultivation method on the golden paper. Where's my true qi? Feeling his meridians were empty, Ning Chen was puzzled. He immediately ran out of bed and rushed to Qing Ning's room. "Sister Qing Ning, are you asleep?" When he reached Qing Ning's room, Ning Chen saw that the lights were still on. He knocked on the door and shouted loudly. In the room, Qing Ning had just taken off her clothes and was about to go to bed when she heard the knocking. She had no choice but to open the door. "What's the matter?" Qing Ning opened the door halfway and stood in front of the door, grumbling. "Are you going to sleep?" Seeing Qing Ning in white pajamas, Ning Chen was a little embarrassed. Should he go in? It was so cold outside. "I'm a eunuch. Who am I afraid of?" As it turned out, Ning Chen's skin was still very thick. He very consciously pushed open the doors of some rooms and walked in openly. Qing Ning was speechless. She didn't understand what Ning Chen's skin was made of. "Sister Qing Ning, my true qi is gone. Do you know what happened?" Ning Chen sat around the table and asked his question. He still had it yesterday. How could it be lost? Qing Ning's body trembled as she looked at Ning Chen in astonishment. She thought about it for a moment and roughly understood what was going on. This brat's mental cultivation method must have been taught to him by the woman from that night. However, what surprised her was that with this fellow's aptitude, it was a miracle that he could cultivate true qi so quickly. Cultivation method requires perseverance, especially in the early stages. When anyone cultivates, they don't dare to be distracted for the first 3 months. They cultivate day and night. The purpose is to stabilize the true qi in their body. Speaking of this, Qing Ning's tone changed. As for you, you didn't expect to achieve anything. Just cultivate as you wish. Ning Chen felt his heart break into pieces. This was a slap in the face. This was too much of a bully. I'm going back to sleep. Goodbye. Ning Chen was in a bad mood. He got up and was about to leave. I won't see you out. Qing Ning sat down at the table and said casually. Ning Chen's footsteps paused. After struggling internally, he sat back down dejectedly. He poured a cup of tea and handed it to Qing Ning. With eager eyes, he said, Sister Qing Ning, please tell me about cultivation. Qing Ning took the tea and took a sip. What do you want to hear? The levels of cultivation, for example, are they divided into gold core, nascent soul, tribulation transcendence, and so on? Also, are peerless experts able to destroy the heavens and earth with a wave of their hands? Also, are you able to live forever after reaching a certain level of cultivation? And Ning Chen's eyes were blurred as his imagination ran wild. In his previous life, he had envied the characters in these books. Now that he had finally heard that mental cultivation methods existed and that true qi was not a lie, could his great dream come true? Sister Qing Ning, why aren't you saying anything? After talking for a long time, Ning Chen noticed that Qing Ning was sitting there without saying a word. Are you still asleep? Qing Ning glanced at Ning Chen and asked indifferently. Ning Chen knew that he was being looked down upon again. Qing Ning placed the teacup on the table and said helplessly, I really don't know where you heard all this nonsense. I've never heard of any of the things you said, and I'm afraid no one else has either. Ning Chen was depressed. He asked, then how do you differentiate between experts? Hotian and Xiantian, Qing Ning replied. Then what realm are you in? Ning Chen's curiosity rose again. Mu Qingxue had said that Qing Ning was very strong, and even said that he was slightly stronger than Qing Ning. Of course, Ning Chen had always thought that she was bragging. Although he had never seen Mu Qingxue fight, he had seen Qing Ning fight. Even after suffering such a heavy injury, she was still extremely powerful. In comparison, Mu Qingxue's battle record was a bit worse. He went out twice and was saved by Ning Chen once. The other time, he fainted and was saved by Ning Chen again. Thinking of this, Ning Chen became even more enthusiastic. He stared straight at Qing Ning, waiting for an answer. Qing Ning felt uncomfortable being stared at, but she still answered honestly, Peek Ho Tian. Not really. Ning Chen was greatly disappointed. He thought that Qing Ning would at least be a Xiantian expert. However, Mu Qingxue might be a Xiantian expert. However, even though he was already a Xiantian expert, he still couldn't survive in the palace. He was injured again and again. It seemed that no matter how good his martial arts were, he was still afraid of kitchen knives. There were many people in the palace and many knives. Seeing Ning Chen's disappointed expression, Qing Ning said unhappily, do you know how many Xiantian experts there are in this world? How many? Ning Chen asked indifferently. Qing Ning calmly stretched out 5 fingers. So few. This time, it was Ning Chen's turn to be surprised. He thought that Xiantian experts were as common as dogs, and Hotian experts were everywhere. Do you think it's so easy to reach the Xiantian realm? Qing Ning paused for a moment, then continued, there are countless people in this world who are stuck between Hotian and Xiantian, but only 5 succeeded. Where are they? Ning Chen asked curiously. Eternal Night Cult has 2, De Xia and Gu Meng each have 1, and the last one is in Du Yi Temple in the southwest. There's only 1 in De Xia. Ning Chen was a little disappointed. The Eternal Night Cult had 2 innate experts, and even the Du Yi Temple, which he didn't know where, had 1 as well. Yet, the Great Xia dynasty was only allocated 1 innate expert. This was really upsetting. Qing Ning introduced the 5 Xiantian experts to Ning Chen one by one. These 5 supreme experts were the 2 hall masters of Eternal Night Cult, the abbot of Du Yi Temple, the dean of De Xia's Tsang Academy, and the Golden Staff state preceptor of Northern Meng Imperial Court. Ning Chen was extremely envious as he listened, and his eyes shone. What a resounding title. The supreme experts of the martial world, just hearing it sounded so cool. According to Qing Ning's inference, Mu Qingxue's cultivation had yet to reach the Xiantian realm, but he shouldn't be far from it. You haven't been cultivating for long, so don't be lazy. If there's anything you don't understand, you can ask me anytime. Qing Ning softly exhorted. After weighing the pros and cons in her heart, she actually came to the same conclusion as Mu Qingxue. She would only guide Ning Chen's cultivation, and not teach him any moves. Of course, Ning Chen didn't know what Qing Ning was thinking. He was happy that he had found a good teacher. His little face was smiling like a flower. "Thank you, Sister Qing Ning." After getting a satisfactory answer, Ning Chen went back with satisfaction. He made up his mind to cultivate the cultivation method on the golden paper. Even if he couldn't become invincible, he could at least strengthen his body. Then, he had to find a chance to run away. It had to be said that Ning Chen's ambition wasn't big. Of course, the main reason was that the enemy was too strong. Just one Zhang Sun was enough to defeat him. He had no choice but to temporarily put down his great ambition and focus on finding a chance to run away. Grandpa Mao once said that all reactionaries were paper tigers. Unfortunately, Zhang Sun wasn't a paper tiger, but a female tiger. Seeing Ning Chen leave, a trace of worry appeared on Qing Ning's gentle face. In fact, it wasn't hard to deduce that the woman Ning Chen took away that night was the assassin who broke into the imperial palace twice. To say something disrespectful, she didn't care about the life or death of Emperor Xia. The only person she cared about was Zhang Sun. Perhaps, she could barely count that brat. However, how long could this matter be hidden? Why would that woman teach Ning Chen a cultivation method? No one knew Ning Chen's situation better than her. In terms of aptitude, he was definitely one of the worst. It would be embarrassing to say that his aptitude was ordinary. However, it was this boy, who had been pestering her to learn martial arts more than 10 days ago, who knew nothing about martial arts, who had actually managed to cultivate true qi without anyone's guidance. It was really too inconceivable. In this world, martial artists weren't cabbages that could be found easily. It was like reading books. There were countless people who had read books, but how many of them could truly be called scholars? Simply put, with Ning Chen's aptitude, even with the guidance of a good teacher, it would take him 3 to 5 months to cultivate true qi. If he fumbled around on his own, it would really depend on the will of the heavens. A bold guess flashed through Qing Ning's mind, but then she shook her head. It shouldn't be the heavenly book, because the heavenly book had been extinct for thousands of years. Moreover, each heavenly book required at least the Xiantian realm to cultivate. She couldn't figure it out, so Qing Ning could only temporarily suppress the doubts in her heart. She made up her mind to check Ning Chen's meridians when she had time. As long as it wasn't the kind of cultivation method that would harm the body, she would let him do as he pleased. Ning Chen didn't know what Qing Ning was thinking, otherwise he would have been scared out of his wits. A few days ago in CI and pharmacy, he dared to let the shopkeeper check his pulse because the shopkeeper already knew that he was a young eunuch who had just entered the palace. It was normal that his pulse didn't change much since he hadn't been cleansed for a long time. However, Qing Ning was different. Her martial arts cultivation had reached the peak of the acquired realm, and her perception of the meridians in the body was far beyond that of ordinary people. With a little attention, she could easily determine that this eunuch wasn't certified by the palace. This night was destined to be an extraordinary night. However, no matter how extraordinary it was still over. After dawn, Qing Ning accompanied Zhang Sun to the heavenly mandate palace. Today was the deadline given by the messenger of the true extreme kingdom. The officials of Great Xia had been waiting in the palace for a long time. The 3 chancellors sat quietly at the head of the officials. As usual, they were as calm as water, indifferent and detached, and did not participate in any court affairs. Compared to the calmness of the 3 chancellors, the officials looked a little too solemn. Some of the older officials had dark circles around their eyes, and their eyes were bloodshot. It was obvious that they didn't have enough sleep. The officials of Great Xia might not be virtuous or talented, but they were rarely disloyal. This huge empire, this invincible dynasty, was built with the blood of more than 20 generations of emperors, officials, generals, and soldiers. Every inch of land was stained with the blood of generations. No matter what, they would not allow any forces to invade them. The strength of Great Xia was not accidental. After all, not every generation of wise emperors and virtuous officials were born. However, it was this loyalty that made Great Xia invincible and proud for 1,000 years. Emperor Xia and Zhang Sun arrived. the messenger of the true extreme kingdom was summoned. The emperor and empress came together to show respect for the messenger. Great Xia was proud, but pride didn't mean arrogance. Great Xia never lacked the necessary etiquette. The messenger of the true extreme kingdom came to the palace with 4 companions. They were dressed strangely and gorgeously. Their heads were held high, and their nostrils were about to reach the sky. There was a lot of space in the palace. The officials stood on both sides. Zhang Sun sat below Emperor Xia, and Qing Ning stood behind him. They looked at the messenger of the true extreme kingdom as if he were an idiot. Emperor Xia, have you solved my problem? The messenger of the true extreme kingdom asked, full of confidence. Messenger, you will know later. Come, prepare the banquet, Emperor Xia said indifferently. At the same time, Qing Ning frowned slightly. She lowered her head and whispered in Zhang Suan's ear, Empress, something is wrong. This messenger of the true extreme kingdom and the people he brought are all martial artists. Zhang Suan's eyes narrowed. She understood immediately what was going on. Go and call Ning Chen over. Yes. Qing Ning left quietly, and then quickly rushed to Weiyang Palace. Chapter 21. What was Ning Chen doing? Ning Chen was brushing his teeth with a self-made toothbrush. It was simple and made of pig hair. Once he brushed it, the hair would fall off. Bah! Bah! Early in the morning, Ning Chen squatted in front of the door and brushed his teeth while spitting out pig hair. He was so focused that he did not even know when Qing Ning arrived. Woo! Ning Chen whimpered as a form of greeting. Her Majesty is looking for you. Come with me. Qing Ning did not have time to talk nonsense and pulled Ning Chen away. Ning Chen was shocked. Before he could drink water to rinse the salt out of his mouth, he was pulled away by Qing Ning. Wait, drink some water. It's too late. There will be plenty of time to drink later. Ning Chen felt miserable. How could it be the same as now? If you have the ability, try to swallow a mouthful of salt. With Qing Ning pulling him, the distance from Wuyang Palace to Heavenly Mandate Palace was not close. In the time it took to drink a cup of tea, they arrived. On the way, Qing Ning quickly explained the situation in the palace. As Ning Chen listened, he despised the actions of the emissary of Jinji Nation. It was strange that the emissary could be so shameless. In fact, the most difficult part of the problem of taking the needles out of a pot of oil was the person who would take the needles out. Previously, the emissary of Jinji Nation suggested that the other party should decide who to take the needles out, which was a reasonable request. However, the emperor and officials of Great Xia underestimated the emissary's shamelessness. Now, in the palace, there were only 5 representatives from Jinji Nation, and all of them were martial artists. How would Great Xia choose? Zhang Sun also realized this point, which was why he called Ning Chen over. If a martial artist had vital energy to protect his body, it would not be a problem for him to put his hand into a pot of oil for a short period of time. This way, Great Xia would be at a disadvantage in terms of candidates. Ning Chen followed Qing Ning behind Zhang Sun and quickly whispered a few words into his ear, explaining a few things. Will it work? Zhang Sun asked worriedly. Her Majesty will know when you see it, Ning Chen nodded and said softly. Qing Ning, go and arrange it. Zhang Sun nodded slightly. This was the only way. It would be best if they could win the first round. At the very least, it would be a draw. Qing Ning heard Ning's words. She had some doubts, but she still listened to the order and went to arrange it. Below the Great Hall, the ministers and the emissary of the true extreme nation were already seated on both sides. They were enjoying the delicious food and the singing and dancing at the same time. Ning Chen was very jealous. He hadn't even finished brushing his teeth, let alone eating. Thinking of this, he looked at the messenger of the true extreme country with even more displeasure. He revealed his signature shy smile and cursed his entire family in his heart. Suddenly, Ning Chen felt a pair of eyes looking at him from the side. When he looked back, he was startled. Wan Gui Fei. Among all the women Ning Chen had seen, Mu Qingxue and the 9th Princess Xia Xinyu were definitely not inferior to anyone in terms of beauty. In terms of dignity, Zhang Sun was naturally the best. Even Qing Ning, without considering personal prejudice, was also a rare beauty. However, in terms of feminine charm, Wan Yunchang was definitely the most outstanding. She was 70% beautiful and 30% seductive. Combined perfectly, she was a femme fatale. Of course, it wasn't to say that these people were not as charming as Wan Yunchang. It was mainly because they had too many shortcomings. Simply put, Mu Qingxue was too cold, the 9th princess was too young, Qing Ning was too fierce, and Zhang Sun, he didn't dare to comment. How did it feel to be stared at by a beauty? If someone said yes at this time, Ning Chen would definitely slap them with a smile. Lowering his head, Ning Chen secretly prayed that Wan Yunchang didn't recognize him. On the first day he entered the palace, he offended the noble Wan Gui Fei. At that time, she didn't seem to care, but who knew what she was thinking? Fortunately, Wan Yunchang's gaze only swept past him and didn't linger for too long. Ning Chen let out a sigh of relief and relaxed his tense body. Ning Chen didn't know that Wan Yunchang had almost forgotten what happened that day. However, when she saw him just now, she remembered. After all, the person sitting in front of him was Zhang Sun. Wan Yunchang retracted her gaze and smiled. Her smile was mesmerizing and soul-stirring. The hearts of the ministers who were looking at her subconsciously skipped a beat. Zhang Sun naturally noticed this gaze, but he didn't say anything. He quietly waited for Qing Ning to prepare the things. In this banquet where the nobles gathered, the eunuchs were the least noticed. Even if someone noticed that the eunuch behind the empress looked unfamiliar, they wouldn't take it to heart. After all, in the 1,000-year history of the Great Xia, eunuchs had never been the center of attention. Emperor Xia's expression was still calm. The dignity of an emperor radiated without being angry. No one would believe that someone who had protected such a large empire for nearly 20 years was useless. Zhang Sun had already sent someone to inform Emperor Xia last night. Therefore, Zhang Sun was the main character of today's event. Emperor Xia wasn't in a hurry. He quietly waited for Zhang Sun to make the arrangements. No one knew Zhang Sun's personality better than him. If he wasn't completely confident, he wouldn't interfere. Zhang Sun's message last night was simple. The Great Xia will not lose the first round. The meaning was clear. It would either be a draw or a victory. Emperor Xia didn't think there would be a better result, so he let Zhang Sun make the arrangements. The emissary of the true extreme nation was also waiting quietly. He was in no hurry. He was already in an invincible position and didn't need to fight for a little while. After waiting for a long time, Qing Ning finally returned. She stood behind Zhang Sun and signaled with her eyes that she was ready. Zhang Sun nodded slightly, and then looked at Emperor Xia without revealing anything on his face. He nodded slightly. Set up the oil pot. Emperor Xia didn't remain silent after receiving the signal. Not long after, a huge oil pot with a stove was moved to the entrance of the Heavenly Mandate Palace. The fire under the oil pot jumped violently. It looked very frightening. Please choose your candidate, Emperor Xia said. Hearing this, the officials of the Great Xia couldn't help but tremble. It wasn't that they were afraid of death, it was just pure fear. In reality, they were overthinking things. No matter how bold the emissary of the true extreme nation was, he couldn't force the officials of the Great Xia into a pot of oil. It wasn't hard to guess who would be the next candidate. It was nothing more than a palace maid, a guard, and a eunuch who had no power or influence. Thinking further, the guards were all martial artists, so it was impossible. The palace maid was a woman, after all. Even if he didn't have tender feelings for the fairer sex, he didn't want to bear the bad reputation of bullying women. The only candidate left was a eunuch. Ning Chen was very smart. He thought more clearly than anyone else, so he lowered his head more than anyone else. If it weren't for the fact that this wasn't the right place, he would have run away. He had said all that needed to be said. Why should he go up and do such a thankless thing? Young eunuch, please. The emissary of the true extreme nation stepped forward and looked at the oil pot. After seeing that it was fine, he turned around and looked around the hall. At first glance, he saw Ning Chen, who lowered his head the most. He had the right status, the right age, and he wasn't a martial artist. He was the best candidate for the oil pot. If Ning Chen knew what the emissary of the true extreme nation was thinking, he would cry out that he was wronged. He was a martial artist. He really was. Unfortunately, he was just a lowly martial artist who hadn't been graded yet. And in the past 2 days, he had lost his only bit of genuine qi. No wonder no one noticed. Seeing that the emissary of the true extreme nation had chosen Ning Chen, Zhang Sun was stunned. She couldn't help but feel a little bit of anticipation. She was worried because she had been trying to hide Ning Chen's existence to protect him from the undercurrents in the palace. So, no matter how great Ning Chen's achievements were, she didn't say anything. She even deliberately hid Ning Chen's name in front of Emperor Xia. However, after a short time together, Zhang Sun knew that she couldn't hide Ning Chen's brilliance forever. So, she was always looking forward to it. She also wanted to see how far this brilliance could shine after getting rid of her restraints. However, compared to Zhang Suan's complicated feelings, Qing Ning's thoughts were much simpler. She was only worried that this guy would mess up today's court. Was Ning Chen happy? No. Did he want to make a contribution? No. Because he was a eunuch. How could he be promoted? Head eunuch? Chief eunuch? It was a matter of principle. He would have to run away sooner or later. He couldn't stay in the palace forever. He helped Zhang Sun for 2 reasons. First, he wanted to appease Zhang Suan's anger. Second, Zhang Sun treated him quite well. Today's situation was the last thing he wanted to encounter. He knew that from now on, the Empress would have countless eyes on him. Neither concubine Wan nor Emperor Xia would allow someone they didn't know to appear beside Zhang Sun. Emperor Xia was heartless. Concubine Wan was heartless. Even Zhang Sun was heartless. Seeing Ning Chen's hesitation, Zhang Sun shouted in a low voice, "Don't panic. Do it boldly. If anything happens, I'll take responsibility." Ning Chen's mind was a little clearer after being reprimanded. He knew he couldn't avoid it this time. Ning Chen stepped out of the line and looked back at Zhang Sun worriedly. He meant to say, "You have to keep your word." Zhang Sun ignored him. She was the empress. If she couldn't even protect a little eunuch, then she didn't deserve to be the empress. The oil pot in the hall gradually began to bubble, and the flames in the stove burned people's faces. Ning Chen waited for a while, and when the bubbles in the oil pot reached the most intense, he put his hand above the oil pot, and then smiled brightly at the messenger of the Jinji kingdom sitting in the hall. He mouthed, "Damn you." The emissary's face darkened. Although he didn't know what the eunuch said, he knew it wasn't anything good. However, when he thought about how the kid's arm would become a fried loach in the next moment, his mood became inexplicably better. Ning Chen put his left hand in, and his expression became very interesting. He put his hand in. In the hall, all the officials' eyelids twitched. The timid ones subconsciously looked away, not daring to watch. With a hiss, Ning Chen's eyes turned red and his entire body trembled. His arms, in particular, were shaking violently, causing the oil in the wok to continuously splash out and fall into the stove, causing the flames to rise with a bang. Seeing this, the emissary of the Jinji state smiled even brighter. It was as if it wasn't a little eunuch's arm in the oil, but the entire Xia dynasty waiting to be slaughtered. However, in the next moment, the emissary's smile froze. In front of the oil pot, the pair of trembling hands, which were mostly covered by the oil-stained sleeves, clearly took out a needle as thin as a hair. Ding! There might have been a sound, but there might not have been a sound. The needle fell to the ground. The little eunuch, whose face was full of pain, squatted on the ground, holding his arm and grinding his teeth. In the hall, Zhang Sun shouted, "Summon the imperial physician." Zhang Sun woke everyone up. Good job. Some official forgot the etiquette in front of the hall. He slammed the table and shouted excitedly. Following that, the crowd cheered loudly for this brave, unfamiliar, and fearless little eunuch. The Xia Emperor's tense face flashed with a touch of satisfaction. It was very light and disappeared in an instant. The imperial physician came quickly. A guard came forward to help Ning Chen up. Then, the imperial physician took the hero away. Zhang Sun glanced at the emissary of the Jinji state seriously and said, "Qing Ning." Yes. Qing Ning understood. She walked to the front of the hall and put the needle back into the oil pot. After this simple action, Qing Ning turned to look at the 5 emissaries in the hall. She said calmly, "I heard that the Jinji state worships martial arts, but I don't know how true this is." As soon as she finished speaking, Qing Ning took a step forward and said coldly, "May I ask who is coming?" Chapter 22. Her casual words shocked everyone in the hall. The officials glanced at Qing Ning and then looked at the Empress. Everyone knew that this woman was the Empress's most trusted person. What did it mean for her to challenge the Empress at this moment? It was obvious that the Empress was angry. At this moment, even Emperor Xia's pupils shrank. No one knew what he was thinking. However, Emperor Xia did not say anything, which meant that he accepted Qing Ning's challenge. While the officials were guessing Emperor Xia's intentions, they were also wondering why the Empress was so angry. Was it because the envoy of Jinji state chose someone beside her? Among the 3 dukes, the Grand Advisor opened his eyes a little and then closed them again, as if he heard nothing. Wan Yunshang's charming face flashed with a charming smile. She knew that their Empress would not be angry over such a boring reason. Her intuition told her that it had something to do with that little eunuch. It had to be said that a woman's 6th sense was sometimes a scary thing. Wan Yunshang's baseless guess was infinitely close to the truth. The envoy of Jinji state had an interesting expression. He did not know why Emperor Xia did not stop this ridiculous and meaningless challenge. He struggled and was caught in the dilemma of accepting or rejecting. In the end, the envoy of Jinji state agreed. Without any surprises, he had to accept. "Gold One, you go." The envoy of Jinji state ordered. A man in his 30s walked out. He was wearing a loose red and black robe. His face was pale and he looked different from ordinary people. Qing Ning could tell at a glance that this man named Gold One was at the 8th level of martial arts. He was the strongest of the 5. There were only 9 levels of martial arts in the world. Qing Ning stood at the top of the 9 levels. She was the strongest of the strong. There were only 5 people in the world. Qing Ning was one of the strongest of the 5. However, Qing Ning was injured. Although she had recuperated for more than 10 days, her injuries were serious. It was impossible for her to recover so quickly. Injuries had a serious impact on any strong person. Sometimes, it was not impossible for someone like Ning Chen, who had not been graded, to kill a 9th-level master by accident and luck. Qing Ning had never been one to underestimate her opponent, so she took her opponent seriously. In the Heavenly Mandate Palace, the battle began instantly. Qing Ning stepped forward at a speed that was not considered fast. Her slender hand reached straight for Jin Yi's chest. It was a simple move, but it brought out a hissing sound that cut through the air. Gold One's expression changed slightly. He retreated 3 steps in a row and 2 steps to the side. However, that white jade-like hand followed him like a shadow, making it difficult for him to avoid it. Qing Ning didn't give in at all. Her fierce and overbearing offensive wanted to destroy all of Gold One's fighting spirit. Gold One's expression changed again. He could tell that the woman in front of him was at a higher level than him. However, when she attacked, there was a sense of disharmony. Gold One understood what this feeling of disharmony was. It was an injury that harmed his foundation. Everyone who practiced martial arts knew that an injured body would not be able to fight, not to mention a serious injury to the foundation. Therefore, even though it was clear that he couldn't dodge, Gold One still tried his best to dodge. After retreating 3 steps, he raised his Jinqi to the peak and punched out with his right fist to meet that slender and terrifying hand. He was ready to take advantage of the force to retreat again. As long as he delayed, his chances of winning would be greater. Unexpectedly, at the moment when the two came into contact, Qing Ning's fierce offensive changed instantly. Her slender hand turned and avoided the full-force punch in front of her. The moment she turned sideways, she pressed her palm on Gold One's right shoulder. Boom, the palm fell, and Gold One's right shoulder immediately burst with a waterfall of blood. However, Qing Ning, whose pace was not fast, flashed and reached the extreme speed. Her afterimage flashed, and a slender hand fell again. It was still the shoulder, but this time it was the left shoulder. Qing Ning's slender hand shook, and Jinqi burst out. Gold One's body flew out in an instant. The moment he landed, he vomited a mouthful of blood, and his face was whiter than snow. Qing Ning laughed coldly. She was injured, but no matter how injured she was still a 9th-level warrior. Even if she was not at the peak, she would not be defeated by a mere 8th-level warrior. There were geniuses in the world who could challenge those of higher levels, but it was obvious that Gold One was far from being qualified. Gold One was defeated without any suspense. It was not because he underestimated his opponent, nor was it because he was arrogant. It was because of the gap in his reaction to the battle, and even more so, the gap in absolute strength. The face of the envoy of the true extreme state was very ugly. He did not expect that such a young palace made of the Xia Empress would have the strength of a 9th-level warrior. He also did not expect that Gold One would be defeated so quickly. There was a gap between an 8th-level warrior and a 9th-level warrior, but it was not to the extent that one side would win by an overwhelming margin. The atmosphere in the hall was very strange. Ning Chen had sneaked back at some point and stood behind Zhang Sun with a painful expression. His right arm was covered with white ointment, and a red cloth wrapped around his arm and hung around his neck. He looked very much like a disabled person. The officials of the Xia Empire looked at Ning Chen with satisfaction in their eyes. This little eunuch was not bad. Ning Chen felt uncomfortable being stared at. He came back to watch the show, not to be stared at. However, for the sake of the exciting scene in a while, he endured it. "Thank you for letting me win," Qing Ning said coldly with cupped fists. Gold One got up, and his expression changed again and again. In the end, he endured the pain in his shoulders and cupped his fists in return. Seeing this, a smile flashed across Ning Chen's face. It was as bright as a flower blooming. Zhang Sun could not bear to see Ning Chen so proud. She said, "Ning Chen, you have done well for the Xia Empire. This empress will give you a favor. The envoy of the true extreme state will be chosen by you." Ning Chen's smile immediately froze. However, he did not dare to go against Zhang Sun's decree in public. He said with a face that deserved a beating, "Thank you, Empress, for your grace." Zhang Sun made a sound of acknowledgement, but her expression did not change. Ning Chen glanced at the emissary of the Xinji kingdom, and then at the 3 people behind the emissary. Finally, he shifted his gaze to the injured Gold One. With a slightly bitter expression, he said, "Since this general's arms are fine and he can still salute, then let this general do it." Hearing this, the eyes of the envoy of the true extreme state turned cold. He looked at Gold One and asked, "How is it?" "I will not fail the mission." Gold One endured the pain and said in a low voice, "Good." The envoy of the true extreme state nodded in satisfaction. He coldly glanced at the eunuch behind Zhang Sun. His eyes were cold. At the entrance of the main hall, a cool breeze blew past, but it couldn't blow away the billowing heat wave. Gold One approached and looked at the bottomless oil pot. Circulating his true qi, he concentrated all his strength on his right arm, and then suddenly reached in. Intense pain came from his damaged tendons and veins. The true qi in Gold One's arm vibrated violently. Boiling oil kept seeping through, burning his skin and intensifying the intense pain. At this moment, not only the envoy of the true extreme state, but even the officials of the Great Xia Empire became nervous. Zhang Sun glanced at Ning Chen. He could not understand what this kid was thinking. As time went on, Gold One's body began to tremble. His expression became more and more unsightly. However, he still did not pick up the needle. To be more precise, it was not that he did not pick it up, but that he could not find it. Seeing this, Ning Chen was laughing so hard that he could not close his mouth. It would be strange if he could find it. You son of a bitch. Zhang Sun did not understand. The Emperor of Xia did not understand. The envoy of the true extreme state was even more confused. They watched as time passed, but Gold One still did not take out the needle. The heat poison attacked his body. Gold One could not bear the heart-wrenching pain. He took a step back and pulled his arm out. Imperial physician, Zhang Sun spoke. It was too timely. No need. The envoy of the true extreme state coldly snorted. He glanced at the kneeling Gold One and said, "We lost the first round. Tomorrow at this time, I will come over to announce the second round. However, this time, I will not give you 3 more days. I hope that the Emperor of Xia and the Empress will still be so lucky." With that, the envoy of the true extreme state led the 3 people behind him out of the palace. He did not look at Gold One again. Gold One's head was on the ground. His body was trembling. It was unknown whether it was because of the pain or because of some other reason. With the court session about to end, the Emperor of Xia was in a good mood. Before leaving, he looked at Ning Chen with praise. He was not happy, but it scared Ning Chen into a cold sweat. Wan Yunsheng stood up as well. A fragrant wind blew past. She paused in front of Ning Chen but did not say anything. She merely laughed softly and left. Let's go. Zhang Sun was in a good mood. Supported by Qing Ning, she stood up and returned to the palace. Ning Chen followed behind without any status. He played the wounded and also had to reveal the secret to satisfy Zhang Suan's evil curiosity. His demonstration of cheating yesterday was enough. Who knew that the envoy of the true extreme state was even more shameless than him? He directly brought 4 martial arts masters. Therefore, he added a little something. He changed the oil he had prepared to soybean oil. He also had Qing Ning beat Gold One up. The boiling point of soybean oil was very high, close to 400 degrees. It was almost twice as high as ordinary oil. Gold One's arms were broken and his jinqi was unstable. He would not be able to last long. Why can't Gold One find the needle in the oil? Zhang Sun was curious. This was what she could not understand. Gold One had searched in the oil for so long. Logically, he should have found the needle. Hearing Zhang Suan's question, Ning Chen smiled embarrassedly. He said bitterly, "That needle is made of tin. It has already melted in the oil. Let alone him, even I can't find it." He had noticed that there were many exquisite tin products in the palace. Therefore, he specially asked Qing Ning to send a craftsman in the palace to make a tin needle. Tin would melt when it was more than 200 degrees. Before the oil boiled, it would have melted completely. It would be strange if Gold One could get it out. Zhang Sun nodded thoughtfully. Then she looked at Ning Chen strangely. The flickering light in her eyes made one's hair stand on end. Ning Chen smiled embarrassedly. He knew that Zhang Sun was thinking about the strange things in his head again. As they talked, they arrived at Weiyang Palace. Zhang Sun immediately returned to her nature of burning bridges. She stopped in her tracks and said lightly, "Okay, we're here. You can continue to be grounded. I want to rest." Ning Chen was speechless. He finally knew what it meant to change faces faster than the weather. However, before Zhang Sun left, Ning Chen could not help but remind her, "Nyang Nyang, that gold one might be useful. Don't worry about things that you shouldn't care about." Zhang Sun stopped and did not respond. Instead, she warned calmly. At night, stars dotted the sky. In Ning Chen's room, a silver light shone brightly. It whistled and surged, creating circles of ripples. The qi that reappeared was even stronger than before. It broke through the first barrier of a martial artist in one fell swoop. In the Dantian's qi sea, the qi vortex gathered and turned into a rolling silver cloud. It continuously emitted waves of qi. Unbelievable. Outside the room, Qing Ning's hand that was about to knock on the door stopped. She stood at the door, not daring to disturb. The shock in her heart could not be concealed. There was no lack of geniuses in this world. It was not rare for someone to reach rank 1 in half a month. However, this kind of thing should never happen to Ning Chen. The path of martial arts was never fair. The gap between a genius and a mortal was unimaginably large. Although it was cruel, this was the truth. Not good. At this moment, Qing Ning's expression changed. She felt that the qi in the room had suddenly become chaotic. Without thinking, she broke the door open. Her beautiful figure flashed and she arrived beside Ning Chen in 2 steps. Her delicate hand pointed at the latter's qi sea. "Concentrate, don't be distracted." Seeing the silver cloud in Ning Chen's qi sea shaking and about to disperse, Qing Ning used her own qi to forcefully protect the dispersing silver qi vortex in Ning Chen's body. Chapter 23. Ning Chen was hit by the true qi in his body. Blood kept flowing out of the corner of his mouth, but he didn't dare to be distracted. He gathered his spirit and reformed the collapsed vortex. How could this be? The next moment, Qing Ning's expression changed again. Frost started to fall in the room and the temperature dropped to the freezing point. A large amount of spiritual qi kept rushing into Ning Chen's dantian. His entire dantian started to spin crazily, swallowing the surrounding spiritual qi. Ha! With a shout, Qing Ning pushed her true qi into Ning Chen's body through her right finger, helping him to control the crazy true qi vortex in his dantian. After about an hour, the painful expression on Ning Chen's face gradually disappeared. His dantian returned to normal, and a silver vortex kept spinning slowly and peacefully. Qing Ning let out a sigh of relief and withdrew her right hand. Her beautiful face was filled with anger. This kid was too reckless. Luckily she came in time, or else he wouldn't even know how he died. Ning Chen opened his eyes and saw Qing Ning's angry face. His heart couldn't help but skip a beat. He was scared and touched at the same time. "Give me your hand and let me check your injuries." Qing Ning saw the blood on the corner of Ning Chen's mouth and was worried about his injuries. She held back her anger and said in a low voice, "Hee, I'm fine." Ning Chen didn't want to. He laughed foolishly and tried to think of a countermeasure. He couldn't let Qing Ning check his pulse. Otherwise, he couldn't hide the fact that he was a fake eunuch. He wasn't worried that Qing Ning would do anything to him, but he was afraid that Zhang Sun would kill him in anger. After all, Qing Ning had already concealed the matter of Mu Qingxue for him. He could roughly see that as long as it was not related to Zhang Sun, Qing Ning could tolerate anything and would not take it to heart. Even if Mu Qingxue was the murderer of Emperor Xia, she could still pretend that she did not know. However, if Zhang Sun was involved, she wouldn't be so easy to talk to. If a fake eunuch appeared by the Empress' side, it would be a big joke. He was sure that once Zhang Sun gave the order, Qing Ning would chop him into pieces. Therefore, he could only laugh foolishly while dodging. If Qing Ning wanted to use force, he would have to resist. Injuries were nothing. Compared to his life, he would endure it even if it was 10 times worse. Seeing Ning Chen's strange behavior, a trace of suspicion arose in Qing Ning's heart. She frowned and said coldly, "Are you hiding something from me?" "Ha, how could I? How could I have the guts to do that?" As Ning Chen spoke, his body kept moving towards the corner of the bed. He couldn't help but worry in his heart. This great aunt wouldn't really use force, right? He couldn't beat her. Fortunately, what Ning Chen was worried about did not happen. Qing Ning only stared at him for a while, then turned around and left. "Then rest well, I'll come and see you tomorrow." "Good night, Sister Qing Ning." Ning Chen heaved a sigh of relief in his heart and hurriedly waved goodbye. However, his whole body was still hiding in the corner of the bed and refused to move. As soon as Qing Ning left, Ning Chen could no longer suppress the bruises in his body. With a pft, he vomited blood all over the floor. Qing Ning's footsteps stopped outside the door, and she waited silently for a long time before she left silently. The bright moon was moving west, and dawn was breaking. Ning Chen was still sitting on the bed, running the Heart Sutras over and over again. He was so focused that he forgot the time. When he woke up, the east rising sun was already dazzling. Ning Chen's heart sank. Thinking of today's literary battle, he felt even more anxious. He pushed the door open and was about to rush to the Heavenly Mandate Palace. However, before he could leave Weiyang Palace, he was stopped by the little eunuch guarding the door. "The Empress has ordered that you can't step out of the palace." The little eunuch guarding the door was very polite, but also very firm. Ning Chen was anxious, but no matter how hard he tried to persuade him, he couldn't get away. For a moment, there was nothing he could do. With Zhang Xuan's cautious personality, if he encountered a problem, he would definitely send someone to summon him. The reason why he hadn't come at this time was either that he had solved the problem of the envoy of the Xinji nation, or that Qing Ning had told him about his injuries. It wasn't certain that he could solve the problem of the envoy of the Xinji nation, and Zhang Sun wouldn't think so. However, Zhang Sun was cautious and would definitely not let go of any possibility. Moreover, in Zhang Xuan's impression, whenever he encountered a strange problem, he would think of Ning Chen first. Ning Chen had never hated a person so much in his life, and today he finally met one. The little eunuch in front of him was impervious to both force and persuasion. No matter what he said, he wouldn't let him go. Why were there so many weirdos in Zhang Xuan's palace? Ning Chen was furious, and for the first time, he had the impulse to beat someone up. Of course, he put it into action. "Ah, the Empress!" Ning Chen was shocked. The moment the little eunuch subconsciously turned around, a fist as big as a casserole hit him on the back. Then, there was no then. "Little guy, you are too inexperienced to fight with me." Ning Chen arrogantly stepped over the little eunuch's body and immediately ran for the Heavenly Mandate Palace. As he ran, he despised himself. Usually, when Zhang Sun came looking for him, he would hide faster than anyone else. Now that Zhang Sun didn't come looking for him, he had to worry about this and that again. Behind the Heavenly Mandate Palace, Ning Chen ran over, panting. Looking at the Imperial Guards, he was troubled again. How was he going to get in? Little eunuch Ning Chen. At this moment, the Imperial Guard closest to him recognized Ning Chen and greeted him. Ning Chen's eyes flashed with confusion. He didn't know anyone in the palace. "Little eunuch, don't you remember? I am Ling Xiao, the one who sent you out of the palace that day." The Imperial Guard reminded him. Ning Chen looked carefully and finally recognized him. He had almost forgotten that he had such an acquaintance. Back then, in order to get out of the palace, he had fooled this guy quite a bit. He didn't expect to meet him again today. "So it is General Ling. Your armor has changed. I almost didn't recognize you." "Congratulations, General." Ning Chen saw that Ling Xiao's position had changed and hurriedly congratulated him. Ling Xiao was in a good mood. He smiled and said, "This is all thanks to you. Little eunuch, are you looking for the empress? Do you need me to go and report?" Hearing this, Ning Chen nodded vigorously. He was worried that he couldn't get in. "Little eunuch, please wait a moment." Ling Xiao laughed heartily, then turned and walked into the palace. While waiting, Ning Chen was bored. He looked around and couldn't help but smack his lips. The decorations of the palace were too extravagant. Emperor Xia and Zhang Sun were too corrupt. "Little eunuch, the empress asked you to go in." After a while, Ling Xiao came back and said in a low voice, "Little eunuch, be careful what you say. The empress doesn't seem to be in a good mood." Ning Chen nodded and gave him a look. "Brother, you are a good friend." Ling Xiao understood and quietly returned a look. "It's nothing." Ning Chen quietly entered from the back of the Heavenly Mandate Palace. He immediately found Zhang Xuan's position. However, after seeing Zhang Xuan's expression, his heart skipped a beat. How was it not good? It was obviously very bad. However, since he was already here, there was no reason to go back. He could only bite the bullet and sneak behind Zhang Sun. He carefully gave Qing Ning a look and asked what was going on. Qing Ning lightly shook her head, indicating that it was not good to ask. After getting the hint, Ning Chen quietly raised his head and looked at Emperor Xia, who was sitting on the dragon throne. He then looked at the officials and saw the annoying, arrogant, and smug face of the emissary of the true extreme nation. He roughly understood what was going on. Great Xia was at a disadvantage. They were about to lose face. Which official can think of an answer? Emperor Xia's face was dark as he asked once more. Ning Chen lowered his head and looked at the black and white words on Zhang Xuan's table. While he was shocked, he couldn't help but feel a trace of other emotions. It seemed that the Confucian officials of Great Xia had a lot of skills. The content recorded on the white paper, whether it was poetry or music, chess, and cards, the Confucian officials of Great Xia had answered them one by one. The only thing that had not been answered were the 3 absolutes out of the 5 couplets. At first glance, it didn't seem difficult to answer. However, when one looked at them carefully, they temporarily had no clue. It wasn't that they couldn't answer, but that the person who came up with the questions had the advantage. Under the time limit, it was naturally difficult to add. On the white paper, there were only 3 questions left. The first question, every inch of land is a temple. Beside the temple is a poem. The poem says, tomorrow, send the monk back to the ancient temple. The second question, Qian 8 trigrams, Kuan 8 trigrams, 8 trigrams, 8 trigrams, 8 trigrams, heaven and earth are settled. The seemingly easiest question was actually the most difficult one. There were only 7 numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Although the Confucian officials of the imperial court were very knowledgeable, they were only 8 or 9 levels high. However, couplets were originally unorthodox. It was popular among the people, scholars, poets, scholars, and beauties. However, the great Confucians rarely dabbled in couplets. To be able to answer 2 of the 5 absolutes in such a short period of time was already not easy. Ning Chen looked at the Zhenji nation envoy with disdain. This fellow was too shameless. The questions that he had prepared for half his life were answered by the great Confucians of Great Xia in the time it took for a stick of incense to burn. Emperor Xia, it seems that your official can't answer. The Zhenji nation envoy laughed, not hiding his arrogance at all. 1,000 years ago, the teacher was born in the Zhenji nation. After that, he taught and taught, passing down the orthodoxy of Confucianism. However, when he came to Great Xia in his later years, the world thought that the teacher was from the Xia dynasty. Now that I think about it, it's really laughable. Fuck. Ning Chen couldn't help but curse. When did the teacher become from the Zhenji nation? Why didn't you say that Great Xia was yours 1,000 years ago? Hearing the Zhenji nation envoy's shameless words, the Confucian officials of Great Xia were so angry that their faces turned red. They cursed. The teacher was the religion of Confucianism. How could they allow others to insult him? What a disgrace to the educated. The Zhenji nation envoy laughed arrogantly. He was very happy to get revenge for the humiliation he had suffered yesterday. Empress. Ning Chen couldn't take it anymore. He said in a low voice, "Let me do it." This time, it was Zhang Xuan's turn to be shocked. Looking at the serious Ning Chen, a trace of hesitation flashed in her beautiful eyes. However, seeing that the incense stick was about to burn out, Zhang Sun didn't think too much. She stood up and looked at Emperor Xia, who was sitting on the dragon throne. "Your Majesty, I recommend someone." "Approved." Emperor Xia narrowed his eyes and said, "Ning Chen." Zhang Sun looked back at Ning Chen. Her expression was unprecedentedly serious. She said seriously, "Don't disgrace the dignity of Great Xia." Even though she was the empress, she still had to bear a lot of pressure to make a guarantee in front of Emperor Xia and all the officials. If anything happened to Ning Chen, it wouldn't be as simple as just losing a round. Ning Chen knew the seriousness of the matter. He also understood the pressure on Zhang Sun. He wasn't acting on impulse. It was just that time didn't allow him to make any more arrangements. Having him answer was the fastest choice. More importantly, he was indebted to Zhang Sun. He couldn't be ungrateful. Ning Chen stepped out calmly. He no longer hid his strength. He stood in the center of the hall with his head held high. A beautiful palace maid immediately brought him a brush, ink, paper, and an inkstone. He placed it on the desk that had already been set up in the hall. Zhang Sun gestured, and Qing Ning stepped forward to grind the ink. In the heavenly mandate palace, there was a romantic atmosphere. Ning Chen picked up the brush and wrote. The first couplet immediately appeared on the paper. Every inch of land is a temple. Beside the temple is a poem. The poem says, "Tomorrow, send the monk back to the ancient temple. 2 trees form a forest. Under the forest is forbidden. Forbidden cloud, enter the forest with one's axe." Good. Several Confucian officials in the court slapped the table and stood up. They looked excited and praised. The couplet was neat and had an extraordinary artistic conception. This little eunuch had once again shocked them. Not far away, the Zhenji nation envoy moved his sleeve and frowned. After a short moment of shock, Ning Chen's brush didn't stop. The second couplet appeared in front of everyone's eyes. Qian 8 trigrams, Kun 8 trigrams, 8 trigrams, 8 trigrams, heaven and earth are set. Wan 9 sounds, Phoenix 9 sounds, 9 sounds 81, Wan and Phoenix cry in harmony. Ha! This time, all the Confucian scholars laughed. This couplet wasn't amazing, but it was a coincidence. Furthermore, it also flattered Zhang Sun and Emperor Xia a little. Wan and Phoenix were both auspicious signs and implied beauty. It could be said to be a good match. Emperor Xia smiled. Although the emperor was a true dragon and it was a little inappropriate to call him a Wan or Phoenix, for the sake of this good match, it was worth it. Chapter 24. 2 of the 3 couplets had been completed, and Ning Chen was about to write the last one. However, at this very moment, the true extreme country envoy's left hand moved, and a gust of wind shot out toward the incense stand at the entrance of the hall. All the officials were stunned, and by the time they came back to their senses, it was too late to stop it. Who? The strong wind swept across, and the incense stick that was left burned up. Time is up, you have lost, the true extreme country envoy stood up and said arrogantly. This sudden situation happened so suddenly. Be it the Xia emperor or the officials, their faces turned green. Helplessly, the true extreme country envoy was so secretive that they had no evidence. In front of the desk, Ning Chen was also stunned. Soon after, his expression turned slightly cold. The couplet that he was about to write immediately changed its meaning. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Filial piety, loyalty, and etiquette. The officials did not understand at first, but after thinking about it, their expressions changed. It was so simple that even the military officials could see it. Ancient 8 virtues: filial piety, loyalty, etiquette, integrity, and shame. Connecting the 7 words together, only shame was lacking. The meaning was very obvious. It was openly mocking the true Extreme Kingdom's envoy for being shameless. Well done. A Confucian stood up and hollered. The defeat was set, but Ning Chen's couplet helped Great Xia vent their anger. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, filial piety, loyalty, etiquette, and etiquette. Shameless, truly shameless. The true extreme country envoy's expression was really ugly. Even his good mood from winning this round was mostly destroyed. Great Xia's luck had not reached its end, and a small eunuch could spoil his plans. Little eunuch, I have another question, the true extreme country envoy laughed coldly. Which one is Mr.? The Great Xia officials were in an uproar, as this was scolding someone. Ning Chen turned sideways and looked at the true extreme nation's emissary face to face. He did not show any signs of weakness as he coldly replied, there are many books that have been passed down from the spring and autumn period. Great! The officials were pumped up. What a good, why ask me? This little eunuch was a genius, he was truly a great person. During the banquet, Zhang Xuan's eyes were filled with gratification. Even if they lost, they did not lose face. Okay. On the dragon throne, the Xia Emperor stood up and decided the outcome of this battle. For this round, the Great Xia admits defeat. I look forward to the 3rd round of the emissary of tomorrow. We definitely won't disappoint you, Emperor Xia, said the true extreme nation's envoy coldly. The court assembly dispersed. Because of Ning Chen's extraordinary performance today, many civil and military officials cast admiring glances at him. Emperor Xia specially rewarded him with 100 taels of gold as a reward. Unfortunately, the gold was taken away by Zhang Sun before it could warm up. Not a penny was left. Ning Chen was depressed the whole way. But since Zhang Sun had spoken, who could he reason with? However, before his gloomy mood was over, a piece of news came from the palace that scared Ning Chen so much that his soul almost left his body. The corpse of the old eunuch of the cleansing room, who had been missing for more than half a month, was fished out from Qingyuan Lake not far from the cleansing room. After hearing this news, Ning Chen paced back and forth in his room for the whole day. There were several times when he had the urge to run away. Now that the old eunuch's corpse had been found, if someone were to match the time of his disappearance with the day Mu Qingxue entered the palace, it would not be difficult to find that the old eunuch had most likely gone missing on that day. If that was the case, then this group of young eunuchs who had just entered the palace would have to undergo a thorough body inspection again. Telling Zhang Sun and then begging for mercy would not work. He was still a criminal. If he added more crimes to his crimes, Zhang Sun might just chop him into pieces in a fit of rage. Zhang Sun had treated him well, but he could not use his life to gamble for Zhang Sun's forgiveness. Run away, yes, I must run away. Ning Chen stopped walking. His eyes flashed with determination. He had to leave. The palace would find out sooner or later. If he did not leave, he would not be able to leave even if he wanted to. But, how could he leave the palace? He had just knocked out a young eunuch this morning. Now that Zhang Sun was watching him even more closely, it was basically impossible for him to escape. Ah, my head hurts. Ning Chen had made up his mind with great difficulty, but he was powerless. He scratched his head with all his strength, but could not think of anything. That's right, the 9th princess. Suddenly, Ning Chen's eyes lit up. He remembered the 9th princess of De Xia who was as beautiful as a flower. He could not win against Zhang Sun, but he could think of a way to start with Xia Xinyu. In the past 2 days, in order to prevent Xia Xinyu from marrying to the Jinji nation, he had put in so much effort that he did not get a single penny. Now, he might even lose his life. This 9th princess had to pay some interest. De Xia and the Jinji nation had won 1 round each. The last round tomorrow would determine the 9th princess's fate. The first 2 rounds of the 3 rounds were about courage and wisdom. In fact, it was a competition of scheming. De Xia was ruled by Confucianism and was greatly influenced by Confucianism. In terms of shamelessness, Ning Chen was much worse than the envoy of the Jinji nation. Fortunately, Ning Chen was thick-skinned enough to block this big hole. As long as he could win, he could forget about his moral integrity. He did not believe that the envoy of the Jinji nation would compete in luck. His surname was Ning, not Sha. Such an obvious thing could only fool some of the rigid scholars in the imperial court. If De Xia won, they would definitely send a woman from the imperial family to the Jinji nation. If he wanted to leave the palace, it would be the best time to sneak into the marriage team. His only chance was to make this a fact before Zhang Sun reacted. Of course, if De Xia lost, the marriage partner would be the 9th princess, and the situation would be much more troublesome. However, no matter what, the 9th princess was the best candidate for negotiation. The reason was very simple. No matter if De Xia lost or won, the 9th princess was the one who could influence Emperor Xia's decision the most. And Emperor Xia's imperial edict was the only key to getting him out of Weiyang Palace. Now, he needed to think about how to persuade Xia Xinyu to ask Emperor Xia for this imperial edict for him. Fortunately, the 9th princess would come to Weiyang Palace every morning and night to greet Zhang Sun. It was not difficult to meet her. Sure enough, when the sun was setting, Xia Xinyu came in spirals. She was wearing a dark green smoky gown, a green grass-pleated skirt scattered with flowers and mist, and a thin veil draped over her body. Her shoulders were slender and her waist was slender. Her skin was like congealed fat, and her breath was like an orchid. Without a doubt, the 9th princess of De Xia was the most beautiful woman in the world. She was loved by the heavens and earth. She was only 16 years old, but she had already shown a peerless beauty. Princess. Ning Chen was waiting on the road and accidentally bumped into her. Xia Xinyu recognized the person in front of her and deliberately stopped. Now, the whole imperial city knew that a little eunuch named Ning Chen was in the limelight in the imperial court. He repeatedly defeated the envoy of the Jinji nation. However, she knew that Ning Chen was still under house arrest. However, other than the people in Weiyang Palace, she was the only one who knew what was going on. Mother hasn't lifted your house arrest? Xia Xinyu asked curiously. Logically speaking, with such a great contribution, the matter of being grounded should have been pardoned long ago. Ha! Ning Chen smiled awkwardly and did not answer. Not to mention lifting the house arrest, even the 100 taels of gold that Emperor Xia rewarded him was confiscated by Zhang Sun. Xia Xinyu's mind was clear. Naturally, she could see the meaning behind Ning Chen's smile. She could not help but wonder what her mother was thinking. Wait, Xia Xinyu suddenly looked at Ning Chen strangely. She almost forgot that the latter was under house arrest. Logically speaking, he should not be here. Little eunuch, since you are waiting here, you must have something to say. Xia Xinyu's eyes narrowed as she said softly. Ning Chen was shocked. This 9th princess was indeed not as gentle and innocent as she looked. Thinking about it, how could there be anyone in the imperial palace who was really simple? Since he had already spoken, Ning Chen did not beat around the bush. He said respectfully, "This little one wants to enter the wedding procession. I hope that the 9th princess can help me." Xia Xinyu frowned. After thinking about it briefly, she understood most of the situation. She could not help but ask curiously, "Why are you so persistent in leaving the palace and trying to escape again? Do you know that if you are caught again this time, even mother will not be able to protect you? I hope that the 9th princess can help me." Ning Chen did not answer. Instead, he said respectfully again. Why should I help you? Xia Xinyu did not ask any more and said indifferently. Ning Chen thought for a moment and said seriously, I can do my best to help Great Xia win the third round. This way, not only can Great Xia defend Bairuan, but the princess will also not have to go to a foreign country. Xia Xinyu's eyes flashed with a strange light. She asked, how do you know that you will definitely win? And how do you know that the other officials of Great Xia will definitely not be able to do it? Everyone can see that this is the truth. Ning Chen said calmly. Although it was an understatement, it was still difficult to hide the pride in his tone. Ning Chen would not look down on everyone, but he would also not belittle himself. After living 2 lives, he had not only increased in age. Being old but not dying was considered a demon. Logically speaking, his current situation was not much different from a demon. I really did not expect that there would be someone like you by mother's side. Xia Xinyu looked at Ning Chen in front of her. Suddenly, the corner of her mouth curved into a smile as she said softly. Princess is too kind. After Ning Chen put down his disguise, he no longer put on a respectful appearance and replied indifferently. All right, I will go to mother's place to pay my respects. As for your conditions, I will seriously consider them. Xia Xinyu smiled gently. Soon after, she walked lightly and continued to walk towards her former eldest grandson's bedroom. After Xia Xinyu left, Ning Chen heaved a sigh of relief. The women in the palace were indeed not easy to deal with. They would never make a promise with no certainty. However, he believed that Xia Xinyu would weigh the pros and cons. After all, the conditions he asked for were only a matter of a few words to her. Going against her promise and forcing him to stay was not a wise choice. Xia Xinyu had stayed in the palace for 16 years. Naturally, she understood this principle better than anyone else. He was also confident that if Xia Xinyu really did not keep her promise, he would make her pay a large enough price in the future. He respected his eldest grandson. In front of him, he did not even dare to speak loudly. That was because his eldest grandson had helped him and protected him. However, this did not mean that he could tolerate other people's discrimination and bullying. At the end of the day, he was never a person who could swallow humiliation. After doing what he had to do, Ning Chen remembered that Qing Ning had saved him last night. He still had not thanked her. Also, he still couldn't understand the paragraphs of text behind the golden paper. He was worried that if he continued to practice like this, he would one day become an idiot. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that something was wrong. Ning Chen took out the golden paper and looked at it. Then, he walked towards Qing Ning's room. Compared to the princes and princesses, he still preferred to spend time with Qing Ning. Although she was a bit fierce, her fierceness was cute. Chapter 25. In the Beijiang Plains, the night had arrived earlier than in the Central Plains. Under the stars, military tents lined the borders of the Beijiang Plains. The horses panted, puffing white steam in the night wind. In the military advisor's tent, a series of light coughs could be heard. Fan Lingyue sat in front of the desk, wearing a thick mink fur cloak in this October night that wasn't too cold. Her delicate and beautiful face was sickly pale, making one's heart ache. How is it? Fan Lingyue asked softly. We barely managed to turn the tables, the young general replied respectfully. An unexpected variable. Fan Lingyue sighed softly. Grand Xia's destiny was already showing signs of decline, but unexpectedly, someone appeared, causing her arrangements to change again and again. Did you find out if this person was among those who followed Zhang Sun Wuyo out of the palace that day? Fan Lingyue continued to ask. I've already found out that there was such a person, the young general replied. Unbelievable. Fan Lingyue was silent. Such an exquisite person entering the palace to become a eunuch, it didn't make sense at all. Moreover, this couldn't be fake, and it couldn't be a scheme by Emperor Xia or Zhang Sun Wuyo. The reason was simple: no emperor would be so magnanimous to allow a fake eunuch into the harem. Although Fan Lingyue was as intelligent as a demon, she wasn't a god after all. Naturally, there were things that she couldn't guess. Moreover, Ning Chen's background couldn't be any clearer, and there were no secrets. However, it was also because of this that Fan Lingyue couldn't figure out the problem. On the table, there was a piece of green cloth spread out. On it was clearly written all the information about Ning Chen's identity that the Northern Meng spies had found. Ordinary background, ordinary experience, parents died early, no relatives, studied for a few years, but didn't have any outstanding performance. Half a month ago, he was forced to sign up to become a eunuch in the palace due to living conditions. Fan Lingyue closed her eyes and thought for a moment, then said to the general beside her, "Force him out of the palace." "Yes," the general bowed and replied. Ning Chen didn't know that he had already been targeted by the scariest military advisor in the world. Otherwise, he would definitely reconsider the issue of leaving the palace. At this moment, Ning Chen was standing in front of Qing Ning's room. He knocked on the door, but no one answered. He knocked again, but still no one answered. This shouldn't have happened. Ning Chen muttered. As long as Zhang Sun Shijing was in Weiyang Palace, she didn't need Qing Ning to stay by her side. Therefore, Qing Ning would stay in her room most of the time. After waiting for a long time and not receiving a response, Ning Chen returned to his residence in low spirits. Since he had come at the wrong time, he might as well make do with the practice first. He wouldn't die anyway, so he could just treat it as strengthening his body. Ning Chen had just left when Qing Ning suddenly opened her eyes in the room. Soon after, she vomited a mouthful of fresh blood, causing her old injuries to flare up once again. I was too impatient. Qing Ning sighed and wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth. Too many things had happened recently, and she increasingly felt the need to recover her strength. However, the injuries she had sustained last time were too severe, and more than half of her body had been damaged. If she wanted to recover, it would take more than a day or two. There were many useful people around Zhang Sun, but not many people she could trust wholeheartedly. After she was injured, she spent most of her time healing, so Zhang Sun's burden was even heavier. If only he could be used. A trace of tiredness flashed through Qing Ning's eyes. Actually, she and Zhang Sun had talked about Ning Chen more than once. Apart from his usual messy behavior, Ning Chen's tolerance was indeed shocking. Unfortunately, this guy always wanted to run away, which gave them a headache. He didn't desire glory, wealth, power, or women. He was neither evil nor perfect. He had a bunch of problems, but they couldn't really find a place to start. She knew that Zhang Sun was a person who cherished talents and valued relationships. Otherwise, he wouldn't have forgiven Ning Chen again and again in a fit of rage. This time, the most important reason for grounding him was to make him calm down and completely give up on the idea of leaving the palace. However, what she and Zhang Sun didn't expect was that Ning Chen's performance in fighting against the envoy of the Kingdom of True Extreme shocked the world. Such intelligence, such amazing talent. Thinking about it, the calmest place in the entire imperial city right now was probably the Weiyang Palace. Ning Chen's sudden rise had already caused a huge commotion outside, but in the Weiyang Palace, it didn't even cause a small ripple. She could see that Ning Chen didn't take it seriously. Except for a little heartache when the Empress confiscated 100 taels of gold from him, he didn't take it seriously at all. In the Qingyue Pavilion in the middle of Weiyang Palace, the 9th princess left after greeting. However, Zhang Suan's bedroom was still lit all night. In the east, Qing Ning's room was also lit all night. Only Ning Chen's room, which was the furthest away, had its light turned off early. No one knew whether he was asleep or not. At dawn, the court meeting was about to start. Ning Chen was called by a little eunuch. For the first time, Zhang Sun took the initiative to take him to the hall together. Unfortunately, it was a little early. Someone looked sleepy and seemed to be very reluctant. Compared with the previous 2 times, Zhang Sun had high expectations for Ning Chen this time. However, he couldn't bear to see this guy's indifferent and lazy appearance. He wanted to scold him, but he swallowed it. Not far away, the envoy of the kingdom of True Extreme came with 5 white-robed Confucians. They were not old, at most 20 years old. However, they didn't have a strong scholarly air. They didn't look like Confucians, but like fortune-tellers. Ning Chen was suddenly energized. Speaking of Confucians, the great Xia dynasty's Confucianism was prosperous. There were many great Confucians in the imperial court. The grand sage of the 3 chancellors was the head of the Confucianism in the imperial court. It could be said that the great Xia dynasty didn't lack Confucians. If the envoy of the kingdom of True Extreme wanted to seriously compete with him, it was no different from asking for a beating. Moreover, this round wasn't about luck or fate. Were these 4 guys really fortune-tellers? He wasn't familiar with fortune-tellers, but he had seen a great one. He met the one when he went out to buy shoes with Li Er. At that time, he didn't think much of it. Later, he thought that the man was really something. That charlatan said that he couldn't escape, and he was indeed caught by Qing Ning. It was true that every profession had its own master. Since they knew about the existence of Jinqi, fortune-tellers weren't something unacceptable. Emperor Xia was still sitting on the highest dragon throne in the heavenly mandate palace. His majestic face didn't have a trace of a smile. As the emperor of the most powerful dynasty in the world, every move of his would shake the world. The emperor of the great Xia dynasty, no matter which generation, would never lose the title of emperor. After Ning Chen followed Zhang Sun into the palace, several people took the initiative to look at him. All the officials knew that this little eunuch was really extraordinary. If it weren't for his status, he would have been roped in by all parties. Unfortunately, he was a eunuch. Because the eunuchs of the previous dynasty once rebelled, the current dynasty severely suppressed the eunuchs. It was almost impossible for a eunuch to be in power. Therefore, Emperor Xia only rewarded Ning Chen with 100 taels of gold for his great service. At the current dynasty, Ning Chen didn't care about this. He really cared about the 100 taels of gold. The court meeting was as boring as ever, especially with the annoying face of the envoy of the kingdom of True Extreme. However, the third question was indeed beyond everyone's expectations. A maze. There was a maze in the palace of the great Xia dynasty. It was built by the craftsmen of the previous dynasty. Why such a maze was built in the palace was unknown. However, everyone knew that the structure of the maze was extremely complicated. After entering, it was basically impossible to come out without 3 to 5 days. The third question of the envoy of the kingdom of True Extreme was very simple. The great Xia dynasty and the kingdom of True Extreme would each send one person in. Whoever came out first would win. Logically speaking, the great Xia dynasty had the advantage. After all, it was a maze in the palace of the great Xia dynasty. They were more or less familiar with the terrain. It was much better than the kingdom of True Extreme. However, even a fool would know that things were not so simple. Moreover, there was no fool present. The problem was the 5 white-robed Confucians that the envoy of the kingdom of True Extreme had brought. They looked like charlatans. No one would believe that there was nothing wrong with them. It really is a test of luck. A Confucian official in the palace sighed. This maze, if one was lucky, could be out in 3 to 5 days. If one was unlucky, it was normal to starve to death inside. The remaining matter was very simple. They just had to choose someone to enter. However, this person had to be very careful. All the officials subconsciously looked at Ning Chen. They were not really expecting anything. It was just that this little eunuch had already given them too many surprises. If he did it again, they would not be surprised. Seeing everyone look at him, Ning Chen smiled shyly and lowered his head, not saying a word. If there was someone who could pass this test, then there was no need to look for him. After all, his agreement with the 9th princess was that he would win. As for who would go and fight the monsters, it was not that important. Looking at the performance of his officials, the Xia emperor unconsciously frowned. He said indifferently, "Is there anyone who wants to recommend themselves?" In the palace, a great Confucian official wanted to step forward but was stopped by another Confucian official. He lightly shook his head. This was not the time to be righteous. No matter what, they could not lose this round. Otherwise, the great Xia dynasty would suffer great losses. At the front, one of the three dukes, Duke Shiyu, who was dressed in luxurious robes, swept his gaze over the 5 people behind the true Extreme Kingdom's emissary. He softly laughed and transmitted, "Grand Sage, these 5 people are not simple. The 5 bodies as one heart technique is just a minor Tao that should not be used in public." The Grand Sage's expression did not change as he calmly replied. "The great Xia dynasty will lose this round." Duke Jingwu honestly interjected. After a simple conversation, the 3 dukes did not fall silent again. They calmly watched the situation develop. They would not interfere in this matter. "Do you have any ideas?" The inaction of the officials caused Zhang Sun to feel dissatisfied. He helplessly glanced at Ning Chen and asked. "That will depend on whether or not the Empress and His Majesty are willing." Ning Chen smiled somewhat embarrassedly. His method was a bit violent and shameless, but it was useful. "What do you mean?" Zhang Sun curiously asked. Ning Chen leaned forward and whispered a few words. Immediately, Zhang Sun's expression changed again and again. It was so gloomy that it could almost rain. "Are you confident?" Zhang Sun clenched his teeth and asked. "More or less." Ning Chen's modesty was back. Zhang Sun's eyes narrowed. A dangerous light inadvertently flashed through them. 100%. Ning Chen's heart tightened and he immediately changed his tone. "Approved. Go and prepare. I will speak with His Majesty about the rest," Zhang Sun calmly said. "Yes," Ning Chen replied and immediately left the palace. After leaving the palace, Ning Chen moved to the side of a general dressed in dark green armor and said a few words. Immediately after, the two of them looked at each other and smiled cunningly. Together, they rushed toward the Imperial Academy of Medicine. Chapter 26. In the Imperial Academy of Medicine, Ling Xiao was looking for something in the mountain of medicinal stones while complaining, "Ning Chen, can you do it or not?" "Of course I can. Why would I look for you if I can't?" In another pile of medicinal stones, Ning Chen poked his head out and replied. "Cough cough, I'm choking to death." Ling Xiao violently coughed a few times. The choking smell made him want to die. "Don't look for me next time. It's too painful. I might as well find someone to fight." Vulgar. Ning Chen did not even raise his head. He raised a finger behind the small mountain and said disdainfully. "General Ling, when will you enter the Xiantian realm?" Cough cough. Ling Xiao coughed again. This time, it was not because of the smell of the medicinal stones, but because of Ning Chen's words. "My ass. Do you think Xiantian is a cabbage that can be easily entered? From what I know, other than the Dean of Tiansang Academy, no one else has entered the Xiantian realm." "Then what realm are you at?" Ning Chen pulled out a saltpeter and casually asked. "8th grade natal realm." Ling Xiao proudly replied. "I despise you." Ning Chen raised a finger again. Only 8th grade, he was not even enough for Qing Ning to beat. "What do you know?" Ling Xiao disdained to argue with him. In Xia, 8th grade experts could already be the general of an army. He was in the imperial palace, where experts gathered, so he did not reveal himself. "I'm already at 1st grade. I just trained 2 days ago." Ling Xiao was speechless. He really could not refute this. The heavens took pity on him. Back then, he had suffered a lot to enter the martial path. Who would have thought that this guy who did not know anything would be able to enter the martial path? "That's because you're lucky." Ling Xiao was not convinced, but he could not help but retort. Luck is also a skill. Look, isn't this round of the envoy from Flatbread Country just a competition of luck? Ning Chen straightened his body and massaged his aching waist. That's true. Why do you call them Flatbread Country? Ling Xiao asked curiously. You can't even tell. Didn't you notice that their people all have big flat faces? Ning Chen replied matter-of-factly. Brother, you're really a talent. Ling Xiao gave him a thumbs up. I'm just famous. Ning Chen modestly replied. That's right, I also wanted to ask you why you're looking for these things. Ling Xiao covered his nose. You will know in a while. General Ling, I have a favor to ask of you. Speak. Don't let anyone else know about what we're looking for today. Even if it's the eldest grandson, no, even if the Empress asks, just say that you don't know and push the responsibility to me. Ning Chen raised his head and said seriously. Ask what? Ling Xiao asked with a strange expression. You know about pestilence, but you don't. I know. If this thing were to spread, the consequences would be even more terrifying than the plague. People are greedy. Sometimes, they will stop at nothing to achieve their goals, sighed Ning Chen. Ling Xiao was shocked. After struggling for a while, he nodded. He roughly understood the meaning behind Ning Chen's words. If that was the case, then this thing really couldn't be spread out. Many thanks, Ning Chen thanked him. He believed in Ling Xiao's character. However, even if they took a step back, even if Zhang Sun and Emperor Xia were to find out what they were looking for today, finding the correct formula would not be so simple. For this reason, he had purposely taken a lot of things. Most of the medicines he had asked Ling Xiao to find were useless. His goal was to confuse the spies in the palace. There was nothing definite in this world. In order to guard against the possibility of something happening, he had no choice but to measure the heart of a gentleman with the yardstick of a villain. Of course, the only and most important reason was that he didn't want to die, and this formula was a life-saving talisman. As long as it wasn't leaked, his head would be saved. The two of them worked for half a day, almost turning the entire Imperial Hospital upside down. However, with Zhang Suan's verbal order and token, the imperial physicians of the Imperial Hospital didn't dare to go forward and ask questions. They could only let the two of them do as they pleased. Zhang Sun didn't have any intention of asking for the jade pendant back, so Ning Chen kept it for himself. This thing was very useful. It could kill whoever it saw. It probably had the same effect as the death exemption medallion. In reality, Zhang Sun had given a lot of thought. It wasn't that she had forgotten, but that she knew that Ning Chen was a troublemaker. If there came a day when she couldn't save him in time, this jade pendant could temporarily save his life. Cough, cough. It's about time. Let's go. Ning Chen found the last thing and casually rummaged through the pile a few more times before standing up. Okay. Ling Xiao couldn't stand it any longer. Hearing Ning Chen's voice, he didn't say anything else, grabbed the things and left. Where are we going? After taking 2 steps, Ling Xiao suddenly stopped. Seeing Ning Chen's contemptuous gaze, he scratched his head and asked. The workshop, Ning Chen said contemptuously. So far. Ling Xiao said reluctantly. You can choose not to go. I'm not forcing you, Ning Chen said indifferently. If you have the ability, then don't go. Ha, I'm just saying. Ling Xiao smiled bitterly. How could he dare not go? Ning Chen was easy to deal with, but the key was that this guy had someone above him. Time was tight. The two of them didn't dare to delay and hurried to the workshop. In the Heavenly Mandate Palace, when a palace maid came up to pour wine, Zhang Sun accidentally knocked over the wine cup and reprimanded the maid. She dipped her finger in the wine and secretly wrote the word drag on the back of the wine pot. Due to the angle, the Kingdom of True Extreme couldn't see anything. However, Emperor Xia, sitting high on the dragon throne, saw everything clearly. Emissary, how about we raise the stakes by 50%? I can use 4.5 years of Bai Ruoyuan's rights to use the Kingdom of True Extreme's 30,000 warhorses. Emperor Xia said calmly, shocking all the officials present. At this moment, even the three dukes had a look of surprise in their eyes. Under such unfavorable conditions, increasing the stakes was deliberately letting the Kingdom of True Extreme take advantage of them. Hearing Emperor Xia's words, the Kingdom of True Extreme's emissary frowned slightly. He thought about it, but he couldn't figure out what Emperor Xia was thinking. Logically speaking, for Emperor Xia to raise the stakes at this moment, he was either bluffing to force him to back down, or he truly had absolute confidence in winning. The Kingdom of True Extreme had less than 40,000 warhorses in reserve. This was after years of accumulation through various channels. Taking out 20,000 to bet was already the limit. They couldn't go any higher. Although he had absolute confidence in the 5 people behind him, he couldn't raise the stakes recklessly. Emperor Xia, please allow me to think for a moment, the emissary said with a serious expression. He couldn't figure out where the problem was. Fine. Emperor Xia nodded. Below him, Zhang Sun sneered. One's position determined one's perspective. The Kingdom of True Extreme was a tiny place. No matter how smart the emissary was, he couldn't walk out of this limit. The Kingdom of True Extreme was vast. They could afford to gamble, but they could also afford to lose. While the emissary was thinking, the officials of the Kingdom of True Extreme were also trying to figure out Emperor Xia's intentions. For the first time, they realized that they really couldn't understand their emperor. Time slowly passed. Emperor Xia didn't rush him from his throne. The emissary's expression kept changing. It had to be said that Emperor Xia's proposal was very tempting. It was difficult for him to refuse Bai Ruoyuan's rights to use the Kingdom of True Extreme's territory for 5 years. However, when he thought of the price he had to pay, he couldn't bear it either. Warhorses were different from ordinary horses. The Kingdom of True Extreme was the same as the Kingdom of True Extreme. They didn't have Fergana horses like the northern Meng court, which could produce large amounts of warhorses. 10,000 warhorses required more than 100,000 horses to cultivate. The production rate of warhorses had always been less than 1 in 10. Otherwise, the Kingdom of True Extreme wouldn't have used such an important place like the Kingdom of True Extreme to gamble. After waiting for a long time, the emissary finally sighed. He admitted that he still couldn't convince himself to gamble. After all, the Kingdom of True Extreme couldn't compare to the Kingdom of True Extreme. They couldn't bear such a huge price. Your Highness, it's ready. At this moment, Ning Chen quietly walked back and indicated. Zhang Sun nodded and then nodded at Emperor Xia, indicating that he was ready. Emissary, do you have a conclusion? Emperor Xia asked. The emissary stepped out and said in a low voice, Emperor Xia's proposal is very tempting. However, I have been ordered to come here. I can't change your mind. I hope you can forgive me. Since that's the case, I won't force you. The wager remains the same. Men, prepare a carriage for Jinqi Palace. Yes, Your Highness. All the officials knelt and then left the Heavenly Mandate Palace. They walked majestically toward Jinqi Palace. Jinqi Palace was a strange palace built by the craftsmen of the previous dynasty. There were 4 gates in the north, south, east, and west. It seemed ordinary, but only those who had entered knew that unless they made a mark and went back the way they came, it was almost impossible to come out. The gamble was very simple. After each of them chose a gate to enter, they just had to walk out of the other gate. The emissary of the Kingdom of True Extreme sent one of the 5 white-robed Confucians into the palace. When it came to the Kingdom of True Extreme, it was Ning Chen again. Ning Chen carried a large bag with rations, water, and jerky on it. He had borrowed it from the imperial kitchen. The emissary of the Kingdom of True Extreme sneered. He didn't care. So what if you prepared 10 days' worth of rations? The 5 skies will had already calculated. If everything went well, an hour would be enough. If you lose, you don't have to come out. Zhang Sun frowned and said angrily when he saw Ning Chen carrying such a large bag. If I win, you'll let me out of the palace? Ning Chen smiled shyly and asked in the end. We'll talk about it when the time comes, Zhang Sun said indifferently. Ning Chen wasn't disappointed. He snorted in his heart. He knew this would be the result. In any case, he had already found another way out. When the time came, it would be too late for Zhang Sun to stop him. The two of them entered the palace at the same time. Behind the emissary of the Kingdom of True Extreme, the four skies wills each stood in front of a gate. Their palms were clasped together, and spiritual light flashed around them. The four symbols telepathy connected with the souls of the white-robed Confucians who had entered Jingqi Palace. Relying on the changes in distance between the five of them, they quickly guided them to find the most correct path. 5 bodies as one. In the Kingdom of True Extreme, a general finally saw through it and shouted in shock. In front, Emperor Xia and Zhang Xuan's hearts tightened. It seemed that they had underestimated the emissary of the Kingdom of True Extreme. With these 5 people, the Kingdom of True Extreme had a very small chance of winning. Empress, are you confident? Emperor Xia's expression was serious as he asked. Zhang Xuan's eyes narrowed. He hesitated for a moment, but he saw Qing Ning nodding seriously. In the end, she sighed and said, I believe in him. Hearing this, Emperor Xia nodded slightly and didn't say anything else. At this moment, suddenly, in front of them in Jingqi Palace, there was an earth-shaking explosion. Heaven and earth shook. Then, there was another explosion. Boom! 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 In less than a quarter of an hour, one explosion after another sounded in the Hall of Righteous Mystery. Before anyone could react, a disheveled figure covered in dust ran out from the west gate. Cough, cough, cough. It wasn't easy to get out of the palace. Ning Chen didn't have the time to care about other things. He coughed and patted the dust off his body. How could the power of this black powder be so terrifying? Luckily, he ran fast enough. Outside the palace, everyone was stunned. Not only the officials of Great Xia, but even the emissary of the Kingdom of True Extreme had yet to recover from the shock. Your Majesty, we won. At this moment, a smile finally appeared on Zhang Xuan's face as he spoke softly. Good. Emperor Xia suppressed the shock in his heart and said in a deep voice. As long as there were war horses, the men of Great Xia had nothing to fear. At the side, the emissary of the Kingdom of True Extreme turned pale. His body trembled, unable to believe this fact. How could a sure-win situation turn out like this? What was the explosion just now? Such earth-shaking movements, other than innate experts, no one else could do it. However, that little eunuch was definitely not an innate expert. Moreover, he didn't feel any terrifying pressure from an innate expert in Jingqi Palace. Why? Chapter 27. The Kingdom of True Extreme had lost. Not only had they lost 20,000 horses, but they had also lost the ability to mobilize their army within 10 years. The agreement was written in black and white. Together with the official seal of the Kingdom of True Extreme, the Kingdom of True Extreme could not go back on their word. Most importantly, the Xia Kingdom was the most powerful country in the world. If anyone dared to go back on their word, the 200,000 Black Feather army of the Marquis would not be as simple as just guarding the place. What was left was the work of the various officials of the Xia Kingdom. The Marquis of the Xia Kingdom was guarding the outside. The only people left in the palace were the civil officers and officials. However, this was enough to deal with these matters. Ning Chen had completed his task. Other than training, he waited for Emperor Xia's decree. Finally, on the 3rd day, Emperor Xia's decree was issued. He conferred the title of Princess Miaoyu to Prince Hua's daughter. She would enter the Kingdom of True Extreme through marriage. Ning Chen's name was on the list. When Zhang Sun and Qing Ning heard the decree, they were stunned. Especially Zhang Sun. She was furious and shocked at the same time. Having stayed in the palace for such a long time, how could she not have guessed the reason behind this? Ning Chen's name was obviously added at the last minute and was dispensable. Emperor Xia's addition was obviously because someone had pleaded for leniency. In the palace, there was only one person that Ning Chen could interact with and influence Emperor Xia. That person was the 9th princess. Very good, very good. Zhang Sun stood in the main hall of the Weiyang Palace. Her face was green with anger. She said sternly, "Someone, bring Ning Chen here." "I'll go." Qing Ning was worried and begged. "You stay here." Zhang Sun was furious. Even her tone towards Qing Ning was much harsher. She knew that Ning Chen and Qing Ning were close. She could not let him go. Not long after, Ning Chen slowly walked over. He looked calm. He did not smile shyly like before. He also did not look afraid. "Your Majesty." Ning Chen knelt down for the first time. He respectfully kowtowed. Zhang Sun was even angrier when she saw Ning Chen. She slammed the table and said angrily, "Are you so eager to leave?" Ning Chen looked up and said calmly, "Your Majesty, you must know that my personality is not suitable for the palace. If I stay here, I will get into trouble sooner or later. I'm the Empress of the Great Xia dynasty, how could I not protect you? What are you afraid of?" The more Zhang Sun thought about it, the angrier he got. He wanted to throw the teacup on the table at the former's face. "I'm afraid that if I cause a huge disaster one day, the first person to chop off my head will be you, Your Highness." Ning Chen sighed softly. Boom! Zhang Sun was infuriated. He grabbed the teacup and fiercely threw it at Ning Chen. With a bang, the teacup hit Ning Chen's forehead and blood splattered out. "You've disappointed me too much." Seeing that Ning Chen's face was covered in blood yet still refused to lower his head, Zhang Sun was so angry that his entire body trembled. He closed his eyes and spoke in disappointment. "The 9th princess is here." At this moment, Xia Xinyu walked over. The moment she entered the hall, she saw this scene and was shocked once again. She knew that her mother would get angry, but she didn't expect her mother to be so angry. "Kneel." Zhang Sun suddenly opened his eyes, looked at Xia Xinyu and said harshly. Xia Xinyu's expression changed slightly and she obediently knelt down. She was shocked. This was the first time she had seen her mother so angry. In this imperial palace, everyone put on a disguise for themselves and rarely showed their true emotions. Her mother's emotions represented that she was truly angry. "You've got guts. Mother raised you for so many years. I didn't think you'd even try to scheme against me." Zhang Sun looked at Xia Xinyu, burning with anger. The people by her side were all great. Zhang Sun hated the two of them. She also hated herself. She hated them for not fighting, and she hated her own ignorance even more. However, what was done could not be undone. The imperial edict had already been issued. Even if she appeared, Emperor Xia would not be able to take back the imperial edict. A monarch's words could not be changed for anyone. The wedding was set at the end of the month. There were less than 20 days until now. This meant that Ning Chen had left the palace in less than 20 days. A trace of exhaustion flashed through Zhang Sun's heart. She didn't want to pursue the matter any further. She sat on the main seat and waved her hand. "Since you've chosen to help him leave the palace, then the remaining 5 months of confinement will be borne by you. You may leave." "Mother." Xia Xinyu was shocked. Her face paled. "Leave." Zhang Sun slammed the table and said sternly. "Yes." Xia Xinyu unwillingly bowed, then stood up and left. This time, she had miscalculated. After Xia Xinyu left, only Ning Chen remained kneeling. Qing Ning stood to the side, but she didn't dare to plead. She knew the Empress was disappointed. Even she didn't understand Ning Chen's actions. Even if he wanted to leave the palace, with the Empress' grace, he might succeed if he begged many times. There was no need for him to leave the palace in such a hurry. Seeing Ning Chen kneeling in front of her with blood flowing down his face, Zhang Sun thought of everything that had happened since he entered the palace. She forcefully suppressed the anger in her heart and said in a low voice, "This consort will give you one last chance. If you admit your wrongs and come back obediently after the wedding, this consort can pretend that nothing happened." Ning Chen sighed heavily and didn't say a word. Things had already reached this point. How could he turn back? If he didn't want to die in the palace, he had to leave as soon as possible. Unfortunately, he couldn't tell Zhang Sun this. He could only keep hiding it. Good, very good. Zhang Sun angrily stood up and walked out of the hall with an ashen face. Qing Ning looked at the kneeling Ning Chen with a complicated expression. She didn't say a word and left with Zhang Sun. Ning Chen knelt on the ground and didn't say a word. He just knelt like this. His heart was filled with bitterness, guilt, and sadness. The sun set and the moon rose. Zhang Sun's palace was still lit. In Wei Yang main hall, Ning Chen still hadn't stood up. The palace maids came several times to change the candles and then left in a hurry. No one dared to stay for even a moment. Neither of them was willing to back down. Zhang Sun was waiting for Ning Chen to admit his wrongs. However, what she got in return was disappointment after disappointment. It wasn't that Ning Chen didn't want to admit his wrongs, but that he couldn't admit his wrongs because he really couldn't come back. He could lie to the world, but he didn't want to lie to Zhang Sun. In front of the back garden, Qing Ning stood in her room. Looking at the brightly lit main hall and Zhang Sun's palace, she felt very complicated. She knew that both the Empress and Ning Chen were stubborn people. This time, there was really no turning back. She didn't understand why Ning Chen would choose this path with his personality. Not only Qing Ning didn't understand, but also Zhang Sun in the palace was wondering why. Ning Chen had just entered the palace, but he was still a person easy to understand. He was smart, proud, and grateful. Sometimes, he was even stubborn to the point of foolishness. But what was it that made him so impatient to leave the palace? Time passed little by little. Zhang Sun and Qing Ning didn't sleep for the whole night. Ning Chen knelt in Wei Yang main hall for the whole night. Those who didn't understand couldn't figure it out, while those who understood would never be able to say it. At dawn, Zhang Sun had something to deal with. Qing Ning followed him out of Wei Yang Palace. When they passed by Wei Yang main hall, Zhang Sun obviously paused, but he didn't stop. What happened in Wei Yang Palace quickly spread out. Everyone in the palace knew that the Empress was furious yesterday. The little eunuch who had been in the limelight recently knelt in the main hall of Wei Yang Palace for a whole night, but no one knew the reason. In addition, another matter had also attracted a lot of attention. It was said that this time, the marriage was not personally arranged by Emperor Xia, but by the daughter of Prince Hua, Xia Miaoyu. Prince Hua could not dissuade her and had no choice but to agree. Xia Miaoyu had been crowned as a princess. The marriage had to be carried out according to the standards of a royal princess. Zhang Sun, as the Empress of Xia dynasty and the master of the harem, had to check all the dowry in person. She was too busy to care about Ning Chen. Ning Chen knelt in Wei Yang main hall. It seemed that he was gradually forgotten. Even the imperial palace didn't care about it. When it was mentioned, they just sighed secretly and felt pity for the little eunuch. It was said that the royal family was ruthless. This was the best example. No matter how amazing you were, once you made a mistake, you would be beaten to the ground. 3 days later, Ning Chen, who hadn't drunk a drop of water, fainted in the hall. Zhang Sun's hands trembled when she heard it, but she didn't show any emotion on her face. She said lightly, "Take good care of him." Then she didn't say anything else. However, from this day on, Zhang Sun didn't let Qing Ning follow her, no matter if she went out or was busy in Wei Yang Palace. Not long after Ning Chen fainted, he woke up. After drinking some water and applying some medicine, he was fine. Qing Ning came soon after. Seeing the former's pale face and cracked lips, a trace of pity flashed across her face. She reprimanded, "Why did you do this?" Ning Chen grinned and said weakly, "I had no choice. I'm sorry. The one you should apologize to is not me, but her ladyship." Qing Ning couldn't help but belittle him. "Ha!" Ning Chen shook his head and smiled bitterly. "Must you go?" Seeing this, Qing Ning didn't say anything more. She sighed softly and asked, "Must go?" Ning Chen nodded and answered. This was his only chance. If he guessed correctly, after the marriage, the group of eunuchs who had just entered the palace would be investigated again. At that time, no one would be able to protect him. Even Zhang Xuan's reputation would be affected. 2 days later, Ning Chen's body had almost recovered. Qing Ning left the palace once and came back with a strangely shaped herb. When he opened the box, he could feel a faint chill. "Eat it," Qing Ning said seriously. "What is it?" Ning Chen didn't suspect anything and ate it. It was extremely bitter and cold. Heavenly frost grass. Qing Ning calmly explained, "The true qi in your body is cold. This heavenly frost grass will help you temper your foundation and increase your cultivation speed." Ning Chen didn't understand half of it and asked curiously, "Is it expensive?" "I don't want silver," Qing Ning calmly replied. She didn't want silver, she wanted spiritual jades. However, there was no need to tell him. "From today onwards, I will teach you movement techniques. You better prepare yourself." As she spoke, Qing Ning turned and walked towards the door. "Follow me." Ning Chen followed her all the way to the back garden. October had arrived and the garden was full of fallen flowers. When the autumn wind blew, the flowers drifted across the sky. "Watch carefully." As soon as she finished speaking, Qing Ning's body moved. In an instant, her figure flew like snow and turned into a small boat among the falling flowers. She danced in the wind and not a single leaf touched her body. Ning Chen was dumbfounded as he watched from the side. What an awesome person. They were about the same age. How could there be such a big gap between them? After a while, Qing Ning stopped and looked at Ning Chen. She calmly asked, "Did you see the steps clearly?" Ning Chen shook his head. It would be strange if he could see clearly. Qing Ning didn't mind and continued to ask, "How much did you see clearly?" "Hee hee." Ning Chen scratched his head in embarrassment. He took 2 steps forward and drew a big circle on the ground. "I only saw this step clearly." Qing Ning's face turned cold. She suppressed her anger and didn't go up to hit him. This was where she had been standing at the beginning. She walked forward and kicked his right leg away. She angrily said, "Stand on one leg. Don't let me see you switch to the other leg for 2 hours." Ning Chen's mouth twitched in pain, but he didn't dare to make a sound. He sucked in a breath of cold air and stood on his left leg. His body kept swaying left and right. 15 minutes later, Ning Chen felt his left leg go numb and his body swayed even more. However, when he saw Qing Ning's cold face, his heart trembled. He clenched his teeth and stood still. Half an hour later, Ning Chen seemed to be unable to feel his left leg. However, there was a burning pain in his knee. This was an old injury from kneeling earlier. It hadn't healed yet. Qing Ning stood there indifferently. She could see that Ning Chen's knee injury didn't hurt his muscles or bones. Even if it hurt, this guy asked for it. Chapter 28. Half an hour later, Ning Chen had reached his limit. His back was wet, and he had no choice but to try to channel the Jinqi in his dantian, gathering it in his left leg bit by bit. It was very little, but the burning pain and emptiness in his left leg were greatly reduced. Seeing that Ning Chen was standing steadily again, Qing Ning nodded silently. the use of Jinqi needed to be experienced by oneself. No matter what others said, it was their opinion. She didn't want to teach him moves mainly because she didn't want him to embark on the path of martial arts. People in Jianghu had no choice. Once he embarked on this path, there was no turning back. The body movement she wanted to teach him was the easiest to learn. It was different from lightness skill. This body movement focused on shifting and dodging in a small area. To put it bluntly, it was used to save his life. Ning Chen more or less guessed Qing Ning's intentions, so he didn't complain about the pain. He just tried his best to persevere. After an hour, the Jinqi in his dantian was almost depleted. Ning Chen once again felt the piercing pain in his left leg, and it was getting more and more intense. Beside him, Qing Ning remained silent. Even though she knew Ning Chen was at his limit, she didn't say anything. However, Ning Chen persevered in the end. Everyone's potential was limitless, especially when it came to life. He knew that every drop of sweat he shed today would increase his chances of survival in the future. He was afraid of death, so he had to endure the pain. At the same time, in the Heavenly Mandate Palace, Emperor Xia sat on the dragon throne, deep in thought. The next moment, a figure appeared in the palace without a sound, as if he had walked out of thin air. Emperor Xia was not surprised. He asked indifferently, "How is it?" "No progress," the Shadow Dragon Guard respectfully replied. Emperor Xia frowned. "How could this be?" "Your Majesty, the Department of Heavenly Works and the Ministry of Works have repeatedly confirmed that no matter how the 17 types of medicinal stones were mixed, it was impossible to produce the explosive effect that day," the Shadow Dragon Guard said in a low voice. The situation that day shocked the court. The entire interior of the Jinqi Palace was blown up, creating a passageway that could be seen through at a glance. If the Xia Kingdom could master this gift, they would be invincible in the world. Emperor Xia narrowed his eyes, carefully weighing the pros and cons. Originally, he wanted to use this opportunity to get rid of this little eunuch as soon as possible. It wasn't wrong to have talent, but having talent that shouldn't be had meant that he shouldn't exist in this world. There were too many eyes in the palace, and with the protection of the Empress, regardless of whether it was in the open or in the dark, it would be inconvenient for him to make a move. It just so happened that Xinu was here to request for an imperial decree, so he took the opportunity to send this little eunuch out of the palace. However, what he didn't expect was that the heavenly bestowal would be so difficult to find. After thinking for a while, the Xia Emperor made up his mind. He calmly said, "Have the Department of Heavenly Works and Works Workshop continue to try. In addition, on the road to the marriage alliance, follow them in secret. Don't let anything happen to Ning Chen." "Yes." The Dark Dragon Guard bowed and was about to leave when he paused and asked, "Your Majesty, if there is a change, what should we do?" Killing intent flashed in Emperor Xia's eyes as he coldly spat out a single word, "Kill." For such a divine item, Grand Xia could choose not to obtain it, but they absolutely couldn't allow others to obtain it. If they had no other choice, they would make this heaven-bestowed item disappear completely. No one would need it anymore. The Dark Dragon Guard understood and left silently. Far away in the west, the space shook like a mirage. A desolate shrine flickered, appearing and disappearing from time to time. All of a sudden, a tyrannical aura descended, spreading out from the shrine. The terrifying pressure was almost materialized. The earth cracked continuously, and the cracks extended out for hundreds of meters. "Welcome, Martial Lord. Welcome, Martial Lord." Amidst the heaven-shaking and earth-shaking greetings, the shrine was cast on the earth. The void was still, and the heavy and simple shrine doors slowly opened. Looking out, 2 rows of soldiers were neatly kneeling on the ground, their heads bowed. In the next moment, a mighty figure like a fiend god walked step by step onto the throne. The moment he turned and sat down, the world changed color. "Long live the Martial Lord! Long live the Martial Lord!" The Martial Lord came out of seclusion, the generals returned to their positions, and the first shrine was officially opened. After 1,000 years, it once again appeared in the world. Tian Huang. On the throne, Yi Wujuan opened his mouth. Immediately, in the void, a bloody and threatening halberd appeared. With a clang, it stabbed into the ground. The divine halberd Tian Huang had once again appeared in the world. At the same time, in an ordinary room in the Sky Academy, the principal's body trembled and he stopped writing. His aged eyes looked towards the west, revealing a trace of worry. In the north, in the northern Meng Imperial Court's Imperial Palace, the Imperial Tutor woke up from his meditation and calmly said, "Inform the military advisor that Yi Wujuan has come out of seclusion." Yes. In the south, in the Du-Yi Temple, a withered old monk was chanting scriptures. The prayer beads in his hand paused for a moment, but after a moment, he continued. In the east, in a desolate city not far from the Grand Xia, a sword lightly moved, and then there was no more movement. Not long after, a beautiful figure walked over and quietly took away the sword in the city. Her beauty added color to the desolate city. "This shadow-bearing sword belongs to you from now on." A calm voice came from the desolate city. "Many thanks, uncle," Mu Qingxue respectfully said. The changes in the world were shocking and calm. Only the top few Xiantian experts in the world sensed the arrival of this moment. The Eternal Night's judgment was beginning to show signs of sin. The first palace of the Eternal Night cult had appeared, and the most powerful martial lord had once again appeared in the world in an invincible manner. The legendary master with the immortal demonic body would once again ignite the flames of war in the world. The Grand Xia that occupied most of the land of the Divine Prefecture was the first to bear the brunt. It was inevitable that they would face the strongest challenge. The first temple in the west and the northern Meng Imperial Court in the north were like tigers and wolves. However, Ning Chen, who was in the Weiyang Palace, didn't know anything about this, nor did he need to know. Whether it was the martial monarch or the Eternal Night cult, they were far beyond his ability and knowledge. He wasn't high enough, so even if the sky fell, it wouldn't be his turn to hold it up. The movement technique that Qing Ning taught him wasn't simple at all, because he had to learn it in 15 days. What made him even more unable to accept was that he really wasn't a genius. Qing Ning was very patient. Although she could be very fierce and violent at times, she was still very patient. 10 days were indeed very short. After 15 days, Ning Chen indeed hadn't been reborn. He was still a first-rank martial artist rookie, and his movement technique was also very clumsy. However, everything was difficult at the beginning. As a rookie who had just come into contact with martial arts, he couldn't ask for too much. The wedding procession of the Grand Xia was ready to go. The mighty imperial army consisted of 500 cavalrymen, heroic and imposing. Ning Chen knelt at the door of the Zhangsun Palace, silently kowtowed 3 times, then got up and left. He was appointed as the personal attendant of Princess Miaoyu by Emperor Xia, so he had to report half a day in advance. "Your Highness, he's gone." In the palace, Qing Ning sighed softly. After knowing Ning Chen for so many days, she finally understood what it meant to be arrogant and daring. In this palace, Ning Chen was the only one who had never knelt before Emperor Xia. He didn't even kneel when he first met the Empress. The Zhangsun Palace quietly looked at the door without saying a word. After a long silence, she calmly got up and said, "Let's go. Come with me to send Miaoyu off." "Yes." Qing Ning nodded and followed. In the Heavenly Mandate Palace, in front of the stone steps paved with white marble, Emperor Xia looked down at the mighty wedding procession. His eyes were deep and calm, and the oppressive aura around him made it hard for people to believe that this was the most mediocre emperor of the Grand Xia in 1,000 years. Behind Emperor Xia, the Zhangsun Palace and concubine Wan sat under the imperial canopy. One was incomparably noble, and the other was stunningly beautiful. All the officials below didn't dare to look directly at them. The 3 most noble people of the Grand Xia sent them off. At the bottom of the stone steps, 500 imperial army soldiers knelt together, their armor clanging, forming a black mass. "Long live the emperor!" Long live the emperor! Long live the emperor! Long live the emperor! The deafening cheers broke through the sky. Emperor Xia raised his hand, and the cheers stopped. The entire heavenly mandate palace was terrifyingly quiet. Emperor Xia said indifferently, "Let's go. Let's go." At the front of the wedding procession, a general wrapped in black armor shouted. Immediately, war horses neighed, and the 500 imperial army soldiers escorted the wedding procession forward. In the procession, beside an extremely luxurious carriage, Ning Chen looked back at Zhang Sun and Qing Ning in front of the heavenly mandate palace. A trace of sadness flashed through his heart. This time, it might really be goodbye forever. He was lucky to have met Zhang Sun after entering the palace. Unfortunately, he had to leave. The wedding procession went east. Behind the 500 imperial army soldiers, there were palace maids and eunuchs, carriages and small carriages. The entire procession was more than 5 miles long, and one couldn't see the end of it. Ning Chen's position was at the very center of the procession, and beside him was Princess Miaoyu's carriage. Everyone in the world was unfamiliar with this woman. The current Emperor Xia was quite generous to his own brothers. Of course, this was on the premise that the princes had enough self-awareness. When the current Emperor Xia ascended the throne, Prince Hua had relieved himself of all his official duties and was content to be a happy prince. He rarely appeared in front of people, so very few people knew that Prince Hua had such a daughter. Ning Chen didn't care about this at all. He only cared about how to escape without being noticed. As for the wedding procession, so many people had already done it, and he wouldn't make a difference. However, when he saw the indistinct old figure in the black carriage behind him, he had to temporarily suppress the idea of escaping. The figure in the carriage was very quiet and didn't say a word along the way. Through the curtain blown by the wind, Ning Chen saw an old man, dressed in green, sitting cross-legged in the carriage. There was a sword across his leg. The sword was not out of its scabbard, so it didn't look out of place. Ning Chen sighed inwardly. Anyone who was so good at pretending was either a swordsman or a bastard. Obviously, this one belonged to the former. It seemed that Emperor Xia cared a lot about this marriage. Not only did he send 500 imperial army soldiers to escort the wedding procession, but he also arranged for such a master to accompany the princess. It was impossible for him to escape in a short period of time. Ning Chen thought about it and decided to infiltrate the enemy's base first, then look for an opportunity to take advantage of it. "Senior, are you thirsty? Senior, are you hungry? Senior, have some fruit. Senior, this." In the next 3 days, Ning Chen shamelessly tried to curry favor with the old man every few days. The old man was silent at first, then continued to be silent. In the end, he couldn't take it anymore and directly shook Ning Chen out of the carriage. Unfortunately, he'd still underestimated Ning Chen's patience. He'd never imagined that a person's face could actually be thick to the point of being so unbridled and insane. Therefore, 5 days later, the old man gave in and allowed Ning Chen to ramble on and on in the carriage, spouting endless nonsense. Ning Chen didn't care that the old man ignored him. It was good enough that he was sitting in a carriage. It was better than walking. As for the princess, he wasn't summoned at all. "Senior, your sword is not bad. Can you let me take a look?" Tired of talking, Ning Chen looked at the sword in front of the old man. Out of curiosity, seeing that the old man didn't object, he stretched out his hand to take a look. Swoosh! At this moment, the sword flashed, instantly illuminating the entire carriage. Chapter 29. Ning Chen's body stiffened. With a ripping sound, his sleeve turned into fragments that filled the air. In a flash, more than half of his sleeve was gone. $% and Ning Chen jumped up at once. He pointed at the old man and almost cursed out loud, but he forcefully swallowed his words. He didn't dare. Ning Chen sat down indignantly and gulped down half a pot of tea. Only then did he suppress his surging anger. One must respect the old and love the young. This old man didn't know how to love the young, so he didn't bicker with him. Endure, he must endure. However, he wasn't completely without gains. At the very least, he had proven that he really couldn't defeat this old man, the road to escape was still far away, and cultivation still required hard work. As a result, in the following days, Ning Chen didn't bicker with the old man anymore. He spent most of his time in the carriage, cultivating the mental cultivation method on the golden paper. He circulated the true qi in his qi si over and over again. The carriage finally regained its peace with great difficulty. The old man naturally wouldn't care about what Ning Chen was doing. Moreover, a rank 1 martial arts rookie really wasn't worthy of his attention. On the 10th day, the bridal procession had already traveled more than 700 li. They were far away from de Xia's imperial city and entered a wasteland that stretched as far as the eye could see. Now that it was close to late autumn, the quiet wasteland appeared even more desolate. The arrival of the cold night made people feel an indescribable chill. Awoo! Awoo! The wolves in the wasteland howled at the moon, causing the camping troops to become nervous. Everyone knew that the most terrifying creatures in the wasteland weren't tigers or leopards, but rather wolves. Wild wolves were cunning and ruthless by nature. They were best at hunting at night and were the fiends of the wasteland. As long as one encountered one, it would be extremely difficult to survive. In this world, there were many things that couldn't be provoked. One of them was the pack of wolves in the wasteland. These kinds of vengeful and ruthless animals, once provoked, would follow like maggots attached to bones. They wouldn't give up until they achieved their goal. Fortunately, the bridal procession was large enough. With more than 1,000 people and 500 imperial guardsmen, ordinary packs of wolves wouldn't dare to carelessly provoke them. As it turned out, that night was peaceful and nothing happened. The Great Xia Imperial Army wasn't an ordinary army. Even from a few miles away, one could feel a different kind of oppressive aura. Even martial arts experts weren't willing to rashly come into contact with them. The escort party had the protection of the Imperial Army. In the past, this would have been impossible. However, this also showed how much importance Emperor Xia placed on the marriage between the Great Xia Kingdom and the true extreme nation. The Great Xia Kingdom needed the stability of the northeast border. Only then could they focus on the northern Meng imperial court in the north and the eternal night cult in the west. Grand Xia had the strongest martial prowess in the world and would have sufficient advantages against any faction. However, this didn't mean that Grand Xia feared no one. Grand Xia had been invincible for 1,000 years. However, they had never been able to win the hearts of the people because Grand Xia didn't believe in gods. Great Xia did not believe in gods. For 1,000 years, they used martial prowess to conquer. They used Confucianism to rule the country and built a prosperous dynasty. 1,000 years had passed. The people of Grand Xia had somewhat forgotten that 1,000 years ago, the strongest power in the divine prefecture wasn't the nobles who ruled over each other, nor was it the Great Yin dynasty that was overthrown by Grand Xia. It was the eternal night cult that had believers all over the world. The ancestors of Grand Xia rose like a comet. Their extremely powerful edge forced the eternal night cult into a desperate situation. They had no choice but to hide in the dark for 1,000 years, waiting for the day to come again. During the 1,000 years of Grand Xia's rule, the influence of the eternal night cult within Grand Xia had been reduced to the lowest point. However, outside of Grand Xia, the influence of the eternal night cult was still deeply rooted. Grand Xia feared no one, but they couldn't sit back and watch the world attack Grand Xia. The true extreme nation was the best breakthrough point. Compared to the northern Meng imperial court and the eternal night cult, the true extreme nation was the most arrogant. However, their national strength and courage were the weakest. As the saying goes, a barking dog doesn't bite, let alone a toothless dog. The true extreme nation sent 20,000 warhorses in such a timely manner. Not only did it solve Grand Xia's urgent problem, but it also cut off half of Grand Xia's military strength. Grand Xia sacrificed a princess in exchange for 20,000 warhorses. It was worth it. Ning Chen had never met Princess Miaoyu, but when he heard that the latter had personally requested to be a chess piece for the peace marriage, he couldn't help but feel a little curious. If it weren't for the great sages and virtuous people in the world, this princess's thoughts were worth thinking about. Thinking about it carefully, this matter wasn't completely untraceable. Everyone was ordinary, and it was nothing more than the word benefit. Thinking about it, there were some clues. Grand Xia had a total of 19 princes and princesses, but only 5 of them had real power. The 4 princes and the 9th princess. However, behind the 4 princes, there was the shadow of the royal family. Now that he thought about it, this Princess Miaoyu and Prince Hua weren't as aloof from worldly affairs as they seemed. Xia Miaoyu going to the true extreme nation for peace marriage had a huge impact. Emperor Xia would definitely compensate Prince Hua. At this time, obtaining Prince Hua's support would be a great help to the 4 princes. For an idle prince to suddenly become a popular figure, even a fool wouldn't believe it was a coincidence. What was more interesting was that all the nobles in the imperial city knew that the 9th princess and Xia Miaoyu had a good relationship. Compared to many of the so-called direct siblings in the palace, their relationship was considered close. The 9th princess's brother was the eldest prince, who was the son of the late imperial noble consort. His status was noble, and he had the support of the eldest grandson. He could be said to be the most legitimate successor to the throne. Therefore, no matter how one looked at it, this peace marriage was inextricably linked to the eldest prince. However, this was the most unreasonable part. Everyone knew that the eldest prince, Xia Zi, was the successor of the Confucian sect. He was full of righteousness and disliked fighting and scheming. If he wasn't born into the royal family, he would be the most likely candidate to succeed the Duke of Grand Wisdom as the head of the Confucian sect. Ning Chen wasn't the only one who couldn't figure out this matter. The entire world couldn't figure it out either. And the person who knew the truth the best was sitting in a luxurious carriage, never showing his face. Because of this, Ning Chen became the most idle person in the entire procession. The wilderness was vast. The bridal procession walked for an entire day and still couldn't see the end. Ning Chen spent most of his time cultivating in the old man's carriage. Everyone had the instinct to seek fortune and avoid calamity. They would subconsciously choose the place they thought was the safest. It was obvious that in Ning Chen's mind, the old man was the most powerful person in the procession, and beside the old man was the safest place. Ning Chen didn't think that the bridal procession would be smooth sailing. There were too many people in the world who didn't want the peace marriage between the great Xia and the true extreme nation. There were so many that he couldn't even count them with his hands and feet. Emperor Xia sent 500 imperial guards and secretly added a master of martial arts. It was obvious that he wanted to guard against people with ulterior motives. Within the borders of the Great Xia, it was absolutely impossible to mobilize a large number of troops to attack the bridal procession openly. The only way to do so was to ambush and assassinate by a master of martial arts. Ning Chen still couldn't understand the extent of a master of martial arts, but he had seen Qing Ning fight when she was seriously injured. The power displayed by her every move was not something ordinary people could resist. He didn't know how powerful the old man in front of him was, but his intuition told him that the old man's strength was definitely not weaker than Qing Ning's. A few days ago, he clearly felt how fast that sword was. If it weren't for the old man's lack of murderous intent, he would have been buried in a foreign land. Awoo! 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 Suddenly, the howls of wolves resounded through the wilderness. The bridal procession was suddenly in a panic. At the front, the general in heavy armor reined in his horse. The 500 imperial guards stopped and observed quietly. In the procession, the eyes of the emissary of the true extreme nation, who had been silent for more than 10 days, shone brightly. His expression was extremely strange. If Princess Miaoyu died within the borders of the Great Xia, the responsibility would be placed on the Great Xia. There would be another change in the peace marriage between the two dynasties. Furthermore, the true extreme nation could even use the matter of the 20,000 warhorses as an excuse. Be on guard. The heavily armored general shouted in a deep voice. The situation was not normal. The wild wolves were intelligent creatures. They would not throw away their lives for no reason. With the deterrence of 500 Imperial Guardsmen here, the wolf pack still dared to appear. There must be something secretly controlling them. Rustle, rustle. In the silent atmosphere, the sound of the wolves trampling on the withered grass resounded in everyone's ears. Gradually, it became more and more obvious. 1, 2, 10, 100, in a short span of a few breaths, hundreds and thousands of wild wolves gathered from all directions. There were so many of them that they couldn't be counted. Awoo! The deep sound of a flute was heard. The formation of the wolf pack suddenly changed. All of their attention was focused on the magnificent carriage in the middle of the procession. Awoo! Another deep sound of a flute was heard. The wolves howled at the sky. Their sinister eyes lost their bloodthirsty demonic look. Soon after, they ran toward the carriage like crazy. Protect the princess. At the front of the procession, the general in heavy armor shouted. With a wave of his hand, 500 Imperial Guards moved quickly. Their blades connected and blocked the attack of the wolf pack. The Imperial Guards of the Great Xia were the elites among the elites. One of them could hold the pass against 10,000. Between the blades, wolf blood rained down. However, there were too many wolves. They were like a black mass that surged forward like a tide. When there was a limit to manpower, a gap began to appear. Ning Chen got off the carriage and stood guard beside Princess Miaoyu's carriage. At this moment, the most important person was the girl in the carriage. If something happened to her, no one present would be able to live. The old man was still calm. The sword on his knee was even more silent and ice-cold. It was indifferent. Ning Chen knew how terrifying this sword was. He was the only person in the procession who had come into close contact with this sword. Therefore, whether or not they could overcome this crisis depended on this sword. Awoo! The madness of the wolf pack was beyond everyone's imagination. Under the situation where the Imperial Guards were close to being massacred, they still charged forward fearlessly. Finally, the first wild wolf broke through the blockade and arrived in front of the carriage with injuries. The Imperial Guards were held back and the old man didn't have any intention of making a move. Facing the only wild wolf that broke through the encirclement, there was actually no one who could step forward to stop it. This strange situation caused the atmosphere to immediately tighten. Ning Chen was the person closest to the carriage. He stood beside the carriage and faced the wild wolf directly, becoming the final barrier. However, anyone with discerning eyes could see that Ning Chen wasn't some martial arts expert. He wasn't even comparable to an ordinary Imperial Guard. However, Ning Chen was the only one left between the injured wild wolf and the carriage. If the wild wolf wanted to attack Princess Miaoyu in the carriage, it had to get rid of this human blocking the road. Ning Chen was stupefied. He didn't expect that the old man really wouldn't help. Looking at the ferocious wild wolf, his entire body broke out in a cold sweat. It was already too late to run at such a close distance. Moreover, Princess Miaoyu's carriage was right behind him. If he dared to run, he probably wouldn't be able to see the sun tomorrow. Coo! The wild wolf's pair of dark green eyes stared at Ning Chen. Its throat continuously emitted a low and deep gurgling sound. Its front claws slightly bent, and soon after, it suddenly pounced. Ning Chen's scalp went numb. His brain couldn't react in time. He subconsciously fell to the ground and rolled to avoid the pouncing wild wolf. However, he heard a ripping sound. Most of his shoulder was scratched open by the wolf's claws. At the moment of life and death, Ning Chen stood up and pounced. He hugged the wolf's head and stared at its neck. Then, he bit down. Awoo! The wild wolf howled in pain. Its body fiercely struggled. However, Ning Chen held the wolf's head in a death grip. Even if he died, he wouldn't let go. Human strength was limited, but human strength was limitless. At this moment of life and death, a human's potential for survival was immeasurable. Ning Chen was more afraid of death than anyone else. Therefore, he bit the wolf's neck, rode the wolf's body, and hugged the wolf's head. No matter what, he didn't let go from beginning to end. The wild wolf struggled because of pain, because of anger, and even more because of fear. Any wild beast's neck had a large artery. If there was too much blood, it would be hard to not die. Of course, Ning Chen also knew this. Therefore, he bit down even harder. Then, the wolf died. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.